insulation on the bottom of that section of the building. That has been completely covered, both sides, with the spray insulation. And as I stated moments ago, we will be finishing the brick facade on that mid to late next week. We can go on to the next slide, please. And this is what I'm going to refer to as the back of the building. If you look to the right side, you can see that is the large area. That there is your gymnasium. And then in the middle section there with the higher roof, that's the auditorium. And then a little bit more to the left, that's the actual roof. And you can see some mechanical equipment has already been set on there for the chillers, and there's some boxes of roof insulation and stuff. But what I wanted to point out here is if you look to the bottom left, you can see a little zigzag concrete wall. All the way over to the right-hand side at the corner where that pile of dirt meets the black, that's all been completed in the last month. So that steel is now complete. The footings have been complete in that area. So if you were to take this drone shot today, it would look like the middle of that building. All of that area has been done, and the roof deck has been landed. It's just not quite spread out yet. So we've been making very good progress this last month. All the steel is complete. All the footing foundations have been completed. We can go on to the next slide. And I just wanted to point out the importance of scheduling and our on-site meetings. We have every Wednesday, if not more. And what we discuss at those meetings is there's certain things that need to happen, but they have to happen in some sequential order. If you look on the slide to the left, you can see some of the windows have already started to been installed. But what we need to do is we need to wash the brick down first, so we're not getting those chemicals that we use to clean the brick onto the new windows and the new aluminum frames. So a lot of scheduling activities and a lot of intercommunication with the trades that are out there. And I must say, it's been going very well. We've got a good team. We can go on to the next slide, please. This is the building modeling information. I'm pleased to say that that has now been 100% complete for the entire building. That's all of the main building, common areas, and both of the 3-story classroom wings. That's 100% complete. And on the next slide, I can show you a couple examples of just how tight everything is up in the ceiling and why we do these 3D modeling ahead of time. If you look to the slide to the left, you can see the ductwork kind of comes down, goes underneath other ductwork, and goes back up. That's not a mistake. That's actually something that's planned because there's so much in that ceiling. We've got the ductwork, the hot and cold water we use to heat and chill the building, the domestic water, the hot water, the sprinkler piping, and all of the lights yet still have to go up in there. So there's a lot of stuff that gets put into that ceiling space, and it was all coordinated ahead of time. And so far, we've had very minimal issues. The picture to the right, I just wanted to point out, this is a bathroom in this special ed room. And what I'm looking for when I'm walking around doing inspections is that wood that you see inside the wall. That's for the handrails, for the grab bars in the bathroom. It's imperative that we make sure that those items are in the wall before we put drywall up, and then somebody comes and tries to hang a grab bar. And if you see the two pieces of metal up to the left of the picture on the right, that's for the mirror over the sink. We just don't want to leave things like that out. Somebody comes to hang those items, there's got to be what we call in-wall blocking and in-wall supports back there. So I'm making sure all that stuff is in place before the drywall gets hung. You can go to the next slide, please. So just an item of quality control. The drawing on the left is what we call a shop drawing, and that's showing us the tapered insulation on the roof. So what I need to do with this drawing is go up on the roof and make sure that the roof is actually tapered. Now, although we're calling this a flat roof on the building, it's not actually flat. We need to taper it towards the roof drains. And if you look to the photo on the right, you can kind of see that tapered insulation. And right about the middle of the photograph is the roof drain. So I have to ensure that that tapered insulation is put in correctly so that your flat roof actually drains. Next slide, please. A few more things I look for when I'm out in the field. The slide on the left, that's going to be an exterior wall panel. And one of the details that typically gets missed in the field is that horizontal bracing that you see 3 rows of in that wall. So I'm up there making sure that that typical detail that gets missed is not missed. And you can also see in that photograph that there's 2 openings in there up top. That is for the ductwork to go through that feeds the ceiling of the auditorium. So we need to make sure that those are all in the correct location. So when it comes time to put the ceiling in, that those items are above the ceiling and in their proper location. The photo on the right, that is a test. What they do when they put all of the heating and cooling piping together, a lot of that is welded steel piping and some of it is soldered copper piping. So there's a lot of connections that go on in there. So what we do is we segregate certain sections of the building and we put them under pressure for a certain time period. And this is a test that, of course, Upper Dublin Township and their code enforcement is also part of. So we know that these systems have been tested as they're going in. Next slide. This I just wanted to highlight. This is going to be the entrance of the new building. And I have that highlighted there, that those letters, Sandy Run Middle School, those are actually illuminated letters. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to show the coordination that it actually takes to put those together. The photo on the left-hand side is the gymnasium. And high up in that gymnasium wall, there are penetrations for those letters. And what the electrician had said they proposed to do was just put junction boxes all the way up top there in case we ever need to access those letters. And we don't want to do that because that's where your bleachers go. The last thing we want your maintenance staff to have to do is set up a ladder on top of a set of open bleachers to access something. So if you look over on the right, those are the pipes at the top of the wall from the picture on the left. They're actually extruding the exterior wall, which will then get to spray-proof, fireproof, then the brick. And then when the letters come, since we went through these painstaking efforts to lay this out correctly, those letters will fit correctly in that spot. And if you ever need to access them, if you look back again to the picture on the left, you can see that they go underneath of the ceiling in the administration area. So if they ever need to be accessed, it's just a matter of popping a ceiling tile out, and then you have access to those letters. So that took quite a bit of coordination between myself, the electrician, and the general contractor and his sign manufacturer. Next slide. On this project, we're using Uponor for the, I'm sure some of you have heard of what's called Pex Piping. It's a flexible plastic piping. And this, the plumber came to us at the beginning of the job and said that they would like to use this and they would give us a credit of $25,000 back towards the project to put into contingency or to be used for something else. So that was a win situation there. And in speaking with Bob Lester, he had preferred to use this type of piping because he doesn't have to worry as much about the water quality and the testing of it, because the plastic piping, unlike copper, it'll never rust, it will never corrode, and it'll last forever. So I just wanted to mention that we're using that on this project, and it's been very successful so far. A couple of added details. I wanted to explain underneath all of your rooftop units. We have, if you look to the right, it says right under the red arrow, it says two-way modulating control valve. If that control valve ever needs to be replaced, the 2 valves on each side of it get closed, that gets removed, and then where it goes underneath and bypasses that two-way modulating valve in case you ever need to replace it. The picture on the left shows 2 union connections. That way I can unscrew both sides of that and then replace the modulating valve. Well, the modulating valves in these cases did not have unions on them. So we asked the HVAC contractor to give us a price because we want to make sure that if something ever goes wrong with those valves, that they can be replaced and the system can still be functional by using the bypass. So we got a very large number from them, $22,000 to be exact, to supply unions on all of these units. Instead of doing that, what I checked with the balancing team and I checked with the design engineers, on the right-hand side, the calibrated balancing valve I have highlighted in yellow, that actually comes with unions. So by moving that calibrated balancing valve in line where I have that red arrow, that'll give us the opportunity to replace that two-way modulating valve if you ever need be, and we added no additional cost to the project. Next slide, please. We are on target for lead, and at this point, Arif, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Zach. Well done. You can see there's just a lot of value-added stuff going on constantly. It's a huge project, and I want to recognize Zach did a great job of representing the team. I do want to recognize the team of architects, contractors, you know, the township code officials, the testing agencies. Everybody is doing a great job. We've been communicating very well with Bob Lester and Andy and the administrative team and getting answers wherever needed. So things are really clicking, and it's a great team. So it's a team effort that's getting us to the update that we're giving you. I just wanted to remind you real quick, we are of course targeting a LEED Gold to comply with our ACE grant. But I also wanted to point out that, you know, we were very strategic in how we implemented the LEED Gold credits and made sure that we were getting value as opposed to just pursuing credits. One of the things you'll notice on this chart, it's hard to read, but under energy and atmosphere, out of 31 points, that's the one on the lower left, out of 31 achievable points, we were getting 29. So if you remember, I've said that to you before, we focused this project with LEED specifically where we get the most bang for our buck, which is under energy and atmosphere, which is energy savings and making sure we have a good building. And so we're using those grant dollars directly to help us improve our building in the right way. There are, of course, a bunch of other credits we're pursuing. I don't want to necessarily go through a whole LEED thing, but there's a couple of slides here. If you go to the next slide, that'll help us just see some of those value-added things. Of course, we have to do recycling on this project. That is a prerequisite. That is not a credit. And our target is 75%. And right now, Zach has been monitoring this with the team, with Revolution Recovery, and we're at about 85%. So we're doing very well in terms of diverting waste from the landfills and sending it back for recycling. So that's really good, again, in terms of the project. If you go to the next slide, Zach mentioned all the coordination. The building envelope, we focus very heavily on this project. So you can do all kinds of stuff with HVAC and lighting, but you know, you only get one chance at a good building envelope. Not only is it the windows, but you see on the left picture there, we used a spray foam insulation, which is 3 inches of continuous insulation along the exterior. And any of you who've built your house or whatever know the value of having continuous insulation along the perimeter. So that's going to give us pay big dividends. And then, of course, the other big area we have to concentrate is on the roof. And you see the roof insulation going in multiple layers. It's a minimum of 5 inches with the tapers and slopes that Zach had discussed. So a good building envelope. And of course, you get brick on top of that to follow on the walls. So if you go to the next slide. Solar panels, we were fortunate again through the grant, and to target those credits, we did need to implement some solar panels. And so we have a 280 kW system planned for the roof areas that are shown in yellow there, and they will be non-penetrating, you know, roof-mounted panels. They'll be integrated and tied into the grid and will offset energy for the building. The solar system also will have a dashboard, a green dashboard that can be used for educational purposes, as well as for the public to see the offsets that the solar will be providing. So that's another plus. Next slide. Thank you, Brooke. You're doing a great job there. Lead energy recovery. This slide, just wanted to point out all of the air handling systems. You know, we've got energy recovery wheels because of the outside air and return air, and trying to recapture again some of the energy in the building. It's a complicated slide, but needless to say, we're using the latest technology to make sure that the air movement and outside air and heating and cooling is occurring in the most efficient way. And then these air handlers deliver the air to VAV boxes that allow for individual control of each space. So Bob Lester can control and manage each classroom space individually from a temperature standpoint, and humidity control will also be part of this. So that's, again, and that pays dividends towards the energy modeling for the building. So next slide. Of course, with all this good stuff, we've been really heavily focused on managing costs. Andy does a great job of that, always monitoring that, always keeping on top of that, and we've been helping him with that. Just wanted to show you here in a very brief picture. We do send a regular update out monthly, but if you can see the slide, the good news is we barely have any change orders. We're still carrying our $2 million contingency, and we also have a significant $1 million allowance still in the project. And so we're doing really well considering where we are in the status of the project. And I know we'll be talking a little bit about budget in a minute. I did want to point out two things here, and one is on the construction testing. That is one contract that we had a not to exceed, but based on the scope of work and some of the effort that was required with all the special excavation and all of that, we will be presenting to Andy for your consideration shortly, perhaps a slight increase in that contract amount. Again, as I noted, there's plenty of contingency, not that we take that lightly, but that is an area that we still have a whole nother phase of extensive site work to go once we demo the building. So we kind of feel like that one might need some adjustment in the near future. So I just wanted to point that out while we're talking about costs here. And I think that's our last slide with the update, Andy and Bob and Mark. So I think that's our update. Anything else, Zach, or we're good?
I believe we're good. Thank you. Good job, Marie. Thanks.
All right, thank you to both of you. Andy, anything to add before I turn to questions?
Nothing to add from my standpoint. Arif, the only thing to mention, I think, and we'll coordinate with this, but just, you know, one of the things I've shared is in my budget document, we added a $200,000 placeholder for COVID as a line item. So while, yes, the contingency is technically $2 million, I only have $1.8 million on my side in my contingency line item, and a separate line item of $200,000 for COVID related placeholder expense. But other than that, nothing to add.
All right.
Very good, and understood. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So comments or questions from the committee or the board? Nobody has anything. I will add that, oh, go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, we and Zach, we toured the building today, and I thought the job site and the site looked very clean. And when you have a clean job site, that means craftsmanship goes up and there's less safety issues. So I want to commend your team on keeping that job site clean.
Thank you. It's a challenge. It's one of the harder things to get everybody to cooperate in that, but thank you. We'll let them know.
Amy.
Yeah, I was also going to remark on our tour today that it just was really nice to see all of the fruits of a long period of labors coming together in such a really, really fine way. In particular, when you get into the classroom spaces, seeing the ceiling height, the airiness, the number of windows, I think the community is really going to appreciate that. I also think that the spaces on paper looked one way and sort of proportionally look a bit different when you get there. And it really has great proportion as well. So just thanks. I know, Zach, the feedback about your work with the team has been fantastic. So thanks, Zach and Arif for letting us borrow him.
Thank you.
Titia.
All right. A question about moving forward. I mean, it seems that things are really well on schedule and everything. I'm just curious, having seen where you are at the moment, do you foresee this winter you can continue to make the progress that you're planning to make, or is there are there weather-related concerns as we are heading forward in the planning?
There are always weather-related concerns, but what I will say with our numerous meetings after meetings after meetings with the different trades, what we have decided to do is, as I stated, the roof is completed on both of the classroom sections. What we are doing starting tomorrow is we're going to start the roof on that large gymnasium that I had pointed out on the drones slide. And then when that area is complete, we're going to go right over to the auditorium, because there's a lot of work in both those spaces, and that opens up quite a bit of real estate, not only to storm and keep it out of the weather, but also to start to put those spaces together. So with the roof on the gymnasium and the roof on the auditorium, and I'm confident that we can do that. Thanksgiving might be close the first or second week in December. But even if we do have a hard winter then thereafter, we've opened up plenty of opportunity to keep the trades working.
That sounds great. It's definitely very impressive, the progress that has happened already. Thanks so much.
Mike.
Hi, again, the workmanship looks really good. Sometimes when I jog through the neighborhood at 7 in the morning, speak to a couple of the construction team members, everyone looks professional, timely, looks like they take a lot of pride. One thing question that I did have for Zach, do you foresee any raw material, any labor shortage challenges that's popped up that could potentially slow down our progress? And if so, what are the contingency plans to mitigate those?
We have looked into most all of those items already. As I stated, the steel has been finished. We've already have the air handler unit ordered, and there are already been half of them have already been shipped, so there's no delays there. We checked on the variable air volume, the each room classroom control that Harry had talked about. That's on track. We looked at the lighting control packages and the lighting. All that seems to be on track. What they had requested with the lighting is that the contractor purchase all of it at one time. But here again, there's some challenges in that. But ultimately, the large items, we even went as far as casework that's not going to be installed for another plus. And we're not anticipating any issues there. There was some talk potentially of some furniture that might be delayed, and if it's not delayed, it might have an increase in cost. But here again, that's another year and a half out. So we have done our homework on trying to see what the long lead time items were, get them procured quickly, get these shop drawings turned around. And even though the job was stopped during COVID, behind the scenes, the architect, the design team, the people were still reviewing those submittals and making sure that that process was ongoing, knowing that we were going to run into some trouble here. So to answer your question, I feel confident that we're not going to have any shortages of materials at this point.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Very well done. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Zach or Arif or anything else on this topic? All right. Thank you both very much for the presentation. I agree with the others. The tour was impressive. The progress looks fantastic. It's always great to see every month or so how much progress is made. It's really amazing to watch, and I look forward to more high positive progress reports in the future. Let's move on, Andy, to the Dewey contract amendment.
Yep, so Arif is going to help me out with this one too. I'm just going to open it up. And so as everyone knows, thank you Arif and Zach for the presentation tonight. So Dewey's been working with us, with the district since the beginning of this project. And the original agreement that we have with them dates back to the January 2017. So as the contract was created 2 years before the construction phase even began, there's some terms in there that we have a mutual desire with Dewey to update, and that's what the amendment is for tonight. So Arif and I have been discussing this over the last couple of months just to organize it for tonight, and I'm going to turn it over. Arif's actually going to present this, and then we'll take any questions. So Arif, all yours.
Okay, so good evening again, and I do want to tell you those questions from your board members. They were very, very good questions, and Mark, I think something that's a little understated is your involvement in the design phase and all through this project. So I know you're probably beaming when you see some of those spaces. So, but
it's exciting, yeah.
Yeah, I know it is for you. So thank you for all your efforts. But on the amendment specifically, as Andy indicated, our contract was executed in January of 2017. And as you well know, construction began in April of 2019 with the modulars. Even the modulars themselves and the configuration of the modulars was not really a vision at the time of execution of the contract in January 2017. And I think we did a really good job of being very fair and looking forward with the contract to all of the potential timelines and scope of work, etc. However, it was impossible to clearly define all of the parameters that have come to bear for this project. And as Andy pointed out, I think, we've been working on the budget pretty regularly, and we just felt that, to reconcile the budget and make sure that we had a clear definition of what our scope and fee is moving forward, it's better that we just revise our contract to amend those parameters. We had an amendment 1, which had to do with the solar, with the ACE grant. And so that's of course been implemented. So that's why this is amendment 2, in case anybody is wondering. Amendment 1 was strictly for the ACE grant pursuit and implementing the lead. Okay, so that's what amendment 1 is. So amendment 2, if you want to really focus in on it, is originally the demolition and site work completion, as you're currently aware, the building completion right now is scheduled for August of 2022. And then we have the entire demo and site work phase, which will carry us through to August of 2023. So from January 2017 to that point, that's 79 months of this project that we have been married to the Upper Dublin School District with. And it's been a pleasure, by the way. It's not, it's been great. So, and I hopefully you guys feel mutually the same, but 79 months, and then it's 52 months of construction phase. So nobody could have envisioned a 52-month construction phase. Now, why is it so much? I know Art has challenged me on this right from the get-go in terms of the schedule, but the reality is we had to do things in phases and steps. And I think right now everybody believes that the schedule was the right schedule. And even with COVID, we were able to manage that. So, right now we're at 52 months of construction, okay? The contract allowed for 38 months of construction. So we were supposed to be on site for 38 months. It's actually in reality 52 months, okay? So that is 14 months extra, technically, of time that, under the contract, we would be eligible to request. However, we've been very efficient in the delivery of our services. To be fair to you, the scope of the project in terms of increased. And so the amount of our fee increased for that reason also, but the scope increased. But so we've looked at the timelines that are necessary to complete this project, and we have decided that the additional 14 months does not need to be requested as additional fee. But what we've decided to do is our fee is based on a percentage fee based on PlanCon J calculation. And what happens is when we have a change order credit, which by the way, we've had more change order credits thus far than we have change order adds, there's language in there that says, well, you know, maybe you need to adjust for that. But it gets very complicated because if we save you $100,000, technically we should be losing $3,500. And that doesn't make any sense, right? Because we're actually working towards, you know, obtaining those change orders. So what we've decided with Andy after discussing it is to fix our fee at a number that is pretty close to what it would have been based on the percentage fee without adjustment for the 14 months. And we've agreed to fix it. It's about $100,000 more than it would be fixed at. What we've also agreed to do, likewise, is if the project is completed by some chance ahead of this August 23 date, which by the way, is not very likely, so I'm being honest with you, that we would then credit you back $25,000 a month if that were to happen by some magical way. But the problem is the sequence of the project, I don't think would allow significant improvement in that regard. The only way that would happen, I told Andy, and I'm just saying this in jest, is if for some reason we decided we were going to keep school remote and we could just go at the other building right away and you know, finish the project. But you know, we've got a modular lease and we've got all kinds of other complications to go along with that. So that's in a nutshell. We think we're being very fair and reasonable because we don't believe we need the additional fee to not request that and fix our fee at $2,450,000, which then allows for the budget to be managed moving forward without adjustments. There is also a contingency fee that we're requesting because of what happened with COVID and perhaps some other factors that would be beyond anybody's control or that we don't even know about. If that would happen, we would advise Andy and likewise the board then that the situation requires additional services, and we would then have that $125,000 to draw upon with prior approval. So in a nutshell, that's it. I don't know if that was too confusing or whether that was clear as day. I'm not sure, Mark.
Well, I think I've got it, but we'll find out if the board has questions. Andy, do you have anything to add?
I don't have anything else to add. I agree with everything that Arif said, and you know, on top of it, like I think the biggest thing is the simplicity of the fixed fee versus the variable fee. That, you know, as you start to dig into the language, there is a lot that goes into agreeing on what that variable fee is. So, you know, for the 14 additional months that we're looking at here, you know, $110,000 is the reasonable number that Arif and I came to on this. So, yeah, I think Arif covered it pretty well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just to make sure I've got it, as I said, I thought I did. We, back in 2017, early 2017, back before we really knew what the scope of the project was, we didn't even know if we were building a new building at the time for sure. It was an estimate of 38 months. That was just an estimate. Estimates are wrong sometimes. It went longer for a whole bunch of reasons, all of them reasonable. And so coming to an agreement on more appropriate language based on that. Do I have is that a reasonable summary?
That's fair.
Okay, so Amy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I you know, off kind of just listening, I like the idea, especially in our current climate, of literally everything being a variable and unknown, that this is set in stone. Because I'm not sure how many variables more I can sort of sustain. So for me, I think this is a good agreement for us to come to now. And I'm appreciative of the negotiating and discussions that you've had with each other, Andy and Arif.
Yeah, and I appreciate it coming to us, before we have to approve additional money at the very end. This is a much better time to be having the discussion than later. Anyone else have comments or questions on this one? Okay, so, Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think the Huey has handled the COVID safety issue perfectly. I mean, gosh, it's really, I really haven't noticed any delays. And I, based on what I listened to with Zach and Arif, I think it's a good team, and I think it's well worth just dealing with it, and it's a reasonable cost.
All right, anybody else? All right, members of the committee, shall we move this one forward to the legislative meeting?
I concur.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
All right, so we will move that one forward. Thank you, Arif. Moving on now, we're going to be discussing some money things, mostly relating around Sandy Run, but we also want to refund some older bonds, and we have Jamie Doyle from PFM to present that to us. Andy, is there any introduction to give here?
No, I mean, you got it. So it's already time for the next borrowing for Sandy Run. So it'll be our 4th borrowing. So thank you to Jamie Doyle from PFM, who has been our financial advisor for a long time here with the district, for being here tonight to walk us through it. So Jamie, it's all yours.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And it's hard to believe it's time to start talking about your calendar year 2021 financing plan. If you scroll to the next page, I always like to start off talking a little bit about interest rates and the market. And this page is 3 different snapshots of the same index. This is the MMD index, Municipal Marketplace Data is what that stands for. And the top chart just shows you that the yield curve is currently very, very flat. It has been for quite some time, but there's not a huge difference in the rate in year 1 and the rate in year 30. Usually it's much steeper in normal times. The middle chart, if you can scroll down just a little bit, shows you the same index going all the way back to 1993. So we are literally at all-time lows right now. And the bottom chart is just a blow up of the red box, so you can get a better look at what has happened with this index over the last almost 2 years. And so you can see the spike upward on that bottom chart right after the stay-at-home order was announced and COVID kind of became a reality and a household name. And you can see we're continue to hover near all-time lows, which is great on the borrowing side, not so great on the investment side, but we're talking about borrowing this evening. If you scroll to the next page, this is your debt portfolio. As always, the top half is gross debt service, meaning principal and interest, and the bottom half is your local share after you receive state reimbursement to varying degrees on most of your issues. And you'll notice that columns 2 through 6 are highlighted. And if you'd scroll down just a little bit more, there we go. We can see the call dates near the bottom of each column. So we're proposing to group refinancings of the first 3, the Series A of 2012, the Series AA of 2012, and the Series B of 2012 into what I'll call step 1 in conjunction with your new money issue, because you can see we're past the call date on all 3 of those issues. And then we'll come back a little later with a step 2 transaction to refinance your 2015 and 2016 bonds, because you can see their call date isn't quite yet. It's not until May 15 of 2021. But we want to develop a comprehensive plan for all of this. If you go to the next page, this page will look familiar. This is a summary of your new money borrowing plan to date. So you'll notice that step 1, 2, and 3 are already labeled actual at the top. And what we're talking about this evening is step 4 in column 4. And this was always based on your draw schedule. This was always the big year, the non-BQ year, bank qualified that is, meaning we were going to plan to issue greater than $10 million in 1 calendar year. And so you can see the proceeds generated by step 4 are almost $35 million. This is a pro rata wraparound amortization, just like the other steps. And It assumes that settlement occurs on January 5th, which is the soonest it can occur. It needs to settle in calendar year 2021, but we can have the sale before that, and we'll go over the timeline in just a minute. Down below in column 15 is the conservatively estimated debt service on this next $35 million. You can see what that looks like. We would do better than that if we were having the sale today. And then we will, of course, be back sometime next year to talk about the final step, step 5. You can see that's still designed to be a bank qualified issue, $9,995,000, but we'll adjust that accordingly when we get there. If your project continues to go so smoothly and you don't need that contingency money that you were just talking about, you could elect to downsize that final borrowing when we get there. So tonight we're just talking about this $35 million borrowing in step 4. Are there any questions on the new money before I transition to the refunding component of step 1? Okay.
I don't see any.
We're very much on target, on schedule with the original plan, and that all looks great. Certainly helps to have all-time low interest rates, because you may recall we've talked about how much to borrow in each of these steps, and it's very nice. I wish I could say I predicted it, but I certainly did not. It's very nice that you're issuing the big part of the plan at these all-time lows. So if you go to one more, yep, there we go, page 6. In conjunction with that $35 million in new money, we would accomplish the refinancing of those 3 series from 2012. So this page shows you your 2012 A bonds. If you did nothing, you continue to make the payments on this page. And you can see you already have pretty low rates locked in column 3. They range from 2.25% to 3%. And it's a pretty short remaining amortization schedule. If you go to the next page, you'll see your 2012 AA bonds. This issue is a little bit longer. It's pretty small. There's only $1,970,000 left on it. It goes out to 2032, and you can see the interest rates in column 3 that you currently have locked in range from a 2.3% to a 3.4%. And on the next page, you'll see your 2012 B bonds. Again, pretty short in duration, pretty low interest rates that range from a 2% to an 8%. And we would refund all 3 of those in their entirety as part of this next step. If you look at page 9 and 10, I won't belabor those. They just show how much money we need to pay off those 3 old series of bonds from 2012. And then page 11 is an important page. Again, we're being conservative, as we always are this early in the process, but estimated net savings to the school district in column 10 total almost $173,000. If you start at the top of column 10 and make your way downward, you can see roughly $94,000 of this could be recognized in the current fiscal year, meaning the money's already in your general fund, and when your invoice shows up in the spring, it would be for almost $94,000 less than what you've budgeted. And then the bulk of the balance, about $51,000, could be recognized in the upcoming budget year ending 2022. And then a couple $1,000s of net savings each of the remaining years thereafter. As always, we're not extending the debt at all. We're simply replacing the old higher rates with today's lower rates. And then right below the savings box, you'll see a light gray shaded box that says present value of 0.1%. So as interest rates move up or down 0.1%, it moves your bottom line net savings by about $44,000. So even though this is pretty short in duration, it's still very, very sensitive. It doesn't take a lot to make the opportunity go away, but it also doesn't take a lot to make the opportunity even more interesting. So that would be done in conjunction with the new money as part of the first step in 2021. Then we'd come back, and if you scroll forward, I have a divider page in here. This would be the second step refunding. On page 13, there's your 2015 bonds. Interest rates range from a 2% to a 3.25% in column 3. On the next page, You'll see your 2016 bonds. This one has bifurcated principal, so there's principal in columns 2 and 4 that we'd refund, and those rates appear in columns 3 and 5. So on this one, at the low point, you're paying a 1.625, and at the high point, a 3% on what's left. The next page just shows the short-term escrow that we would set up. We're allowed to have up to a 90-day escrow to get to that May 15th call date that we've promised the bondholders, that they get to hold the bonds until that date. So this would be set up to pay off the principal and interest on May 15th. And then the next page is the savings page for step 2. And you can see at our conservative estimate, net savings to the district, about $184,000 in that last column. About $126,000 of that could be recognized in the current fiscal year, and about $45,000 in the upcoming budget year, and then a couple hundred to a couple $1,000 each year thereafter. This one's even more sensitive. 0.1% moves your savings number by about $79,000. If you go to the next page, you'll see 2 sample motions, one for each step. So step 1 again includes that almost $35 million of new money for your Sandy Run Middle School project and the refinancing of the 3 2012 series of bonds. And we're suggesting that you set a minimum net savings target of $100,000. It's not a maximum. As always, it's my job to save you every dollar that I can. But we need to set a minimum net savings target. So, you know, if we're below that threshold, I would be in contact with Andy, and, you know, we would talk about either postponing or pulling that portion out of the transaction. Likewise, down below in step 2, this would authorize the finance team to get the paperwork in order for that second refinancing. And we're suggesting that you set a minimum net savings target of an additional $100,000 on that step of the plan. And then finally, my last page, the sample timeline is such, and you'll see that a lot of these dates have or later after them. If you're inclined to move these motions to your voting meeting, you could vote on them and authorize the finance team to proceed next week and get the paperwork in order. And then November 23rd, we could be back at that voting meeting with the maximum parameters resolutions, which is said paperwork. And then we could be ready to price step 1 and actually lock in interest rates as early as the week of November 30th. Step 1 could settle around January 5th, which you saw on some of the prior summary. And then we'd come back in January around the 11th or later, depending on market conditions, to price that second step and lock in interest rates. And that second refunding would settle around mid-February. So I will pause there to entertain any questions that you may have, but this is shaping up to be the lowest interest rates that the district has ever issued debt.
Thank you, Jamie. Brooke, if you would just bring us back to slide 2, which is the slide with the current market conditions. Jamie, I've asked pretty much every time you've been here, isn't it time to refund more of these bonds? And you said it doesn't pay. So now it finally pays when rates are this low. I just want to point out, like, that big drop we see in 2016, which was that was Brexit.
Yes.
Brought the market down to there, and at that time we were like, the market's never going to be this low again. We should do everything we can, and several times since, and it is amazing how low the rates are right now. So I'm fully supportive that of refunding these and doing it concurrently with the new issue makes a lot of sense to me. Art, I see your hand is up.
Three questions, Jamie. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So the 5 refinancing, how many of them are electoral debt? Or are they split?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have that separation in here. But,
Okay.
you know, again, I would just say we're not extending that debt at all, just simply lowering the interest rate. But I can certainly get back to you with that breakdown.
I think most of it is, I don't have it at hand right now, but I think most of it is.
Most of it is, yeah. My other question is, I know how conservative, you know, you tend to be, and we appreciate that. When you say the present value is 10 basis points, right? It equates to 44,000 in the first tranche that you're doing. But we have to also realize that you're conservative. So even if we see a 10 basis point move, doesn't mean that there's going to be a 44,000 increase. So,
Well, the conservatism is not in that PV. I mean, that, you know, that PV of 0.1%, you know, if rates are 0.1% lower than what I have in there, it will move your savings 44,000 to the good.
Yeah, the conservatism is in the estimated rates, right?
Correct. The conservatism is in column 3, not in that present value number.
right, okay, I understand. And then the other question is, we do get the lock in November 30th with the rates. If after the election things get kind of strange, I mean, do you guys always consider waiting a little bit longer, or is that the target?
That is a great question. Andy and I have already had that conversation, and that's exactly why it says, you know, or later after a lot of those dates. If November 30th, the week of, is not the right time, you know, I'll be in touch with Andy, and, you know, we'll have that discussion, and we will wait for the right time. And that might mean that you don't get your new money January 5th and have access to those funds to pay your construction bills. That might mean that we ask you to come back and pass a reimbursement resolution if you have to front some of your reserves temporarily until we get to the right time to issue debt. You know, we would have that discussion with you.
Jamie, I think just on that point, we are going to need a reimbursement resolution either way, because we are tracking to sort of spend the end of what we have available to us in bond proceeds by the end of November. And that was sort of the plan and the trend all along.
Right.
So if we go out into the year, one of the conversations Jamie and I had was, how much would we need to be able to cover? And I think we're in a good place to have some flexibility there if needed.
Yes, and a reimbursement resolution, I know you've heard me say it before, you know, it's no harm, no foul, and I'd rather be conservative on that as well and assume a worst case scenario that, you know, maybe we don't settle on the new money till, I don't know, the end of March. I mean, who knows? But let's be conservative on the amount that you think you might have to front if there were a reason to delay the sale and settlement of that new money. Because there could be.
All right, anyone else have comments or questions on this item? Excellent. All right, so in that case, let's, is the committee prepared to move this forward to the legislative meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we will do that, and so we should be on track, Jamie, to follow that schedule that you recommended and approve this. Is it next Monday already? Okay. Next item up. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.
Next item up, we have a proposal from Breslin, Ridyard Federo, our architects for Sandy Run, for furniture and other fixtures for Sandy Run.
Yeah, so as sort of mentioned already, we're talking a lot about Sandy Run tonight. It is time for us to begin the planning process for furniture and equipment for the new middle school. There's a nice synergy to move forward with working with Breslin. This is a huge project to furnish an entire brand new building. And Breslin's done all the work around this with the drawings. They actually have drawings with all of the information on it around not types of furniture, desks, teacher desks, things that are needed in the classroom and throughout the building. So we would like to move forward with Breslin to do this work with us. They have done this for many projects, including 2 recent ones, the Upper Perkiomen Middle School and Nitchman Middle School. So they were the architect, and they've taken on this work as to bid the furniture. So this is a substantial project for the building. They will work with us work with a team of people here at the district, develop bid documents, manage the bid process, and assure we are meeting all building and ADA requirements along the way. So Breslin won't do this work alone, so they've made it clear they'll sort of facilitate or quarterback the process, and they'll lead a team of our staff here at the district to make all the final decisions about what furniture we need, what types we need, what the teachers and students and staff need in the building. So we'd like to move forward with them. Their estimate is $18,000 to $28,000 for this work based on the recent projects that they've done. But basically it's all on a time and materials basis.
Okay, Art.
Well, I don't have to be first, but I'll go. And I strongly support this because I know we were visiting some other districts that were working with Breslin. One or two of them decided to not use them, Dr. Yanni's nodding, to select their furniture. And when we left those buildings, we all said that was a huge mistake because the furniture was inappropriate, especially in the library. I remember the libraries especially. So this is a very good motion tonight, and I strongly think that using them, seeing so many of their other projects and buildings, they have very good taste, and they're not going. It's not going to be expensive, and I think it's going to be right for what we need, at Sandy Run.
I will add, I agree with, and we did have that experience looking at other districts, and we do know that they do more than just, design the structural bit of a building. This is certainly in their wheelhouse, and it is absolutely massive and daunting project. And I don't know that we have the staff internally to do a project of this size. I am curious though, who, and I guess I'm asking Steve, who on our side is the go-to person to lead this and make these kinds of decisions? Is it Dan Ortiz?
It'll be Dan, and we will be putting together a group of teachers from the middle school to explore some options for furniture. The one thing that I wanted to stress, any money that we're putting out for this service, we will save exponentially more money. As has already been said, when we looked at other buildings that didn't take the advice of the professionals, they've already had to repurchase furniture. I feel that this will set us up well in the new building.
Yeah, good comment. Darlene.
I just want to also support the idea of hiring them to lead this project. I would agree with everything that's been said. It's massive when you're furnishing an entire building, and to have their expertise will really be helpful to us. I also really appreciate that they will be working with our team. So it's not as if they're just doing whatever they want to do, but they'll be doing it in conjunction with our own staff. And I think that's the way to go.
Stan.
Yeah, my question is, would they consider recycling any of the existing school furniture in the modulars or any of the newer furniture that's in, the...
Mr. Robsky, there is a limited number of pieces of furniture in the existing building that will go to the new Sandy Run. A lot of, over the last couple of years, we've not made large furniture purchases for Sandy Run, knowing that we were about to engage in a construction project, but there are a number of pieces. The other point that I want to make with this, this will also ensure that the furniture that we buy and the way we set up spaces will remain fully ADA compliant.
Amy.
I think that Breslin has shown that their reputation for detail-oriented planning has really proven out to be true in terms of the limited numbers of change orders and so forth. I want to ask, though, that the team, as we go forward, I definitely want, the guidance and leadership on this. but also want to be sure that we're doing a couple things, thinking outside of the box. I'm hoping for a long time to come that we get back to some sort of normalcy in terms of how our students are positioned in classrooms and all of that. But I think there might be a new set of thinking that has to come into play. So it's just a comment and a request more than anything, as we think about what school is going to look like in the future.
Well, that's another good reason to hire professionals, because they're plugged into that industry in a way that none of us are, and will be most prepared to adopt any new thinking that may come from this. Titia.
Aside from Breslin's expertise, is there also a financial benefit? Can they negotiate a more competitive pricing if they are involved?
I don't know that they'll necessarily be able to get us any better pricing. Most of what we will be purchasing will be off state contract, state bid. But, I think when you think of some of the spaces in the building, when we're looking at the collaboration spaces, the library, the STEM and STEAM lab, and those types of areas, I think they will be able to give us greater access to the types of furniture that they think will sustain use over time.
One comment, Titia, go ahead.
I just went.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw your hand was up. Yes. They do, in the contract, they talk a lot about working with Corbett as the furniture provider, or at least a furniture provider, a representative for furniture manufacturers. Corbett is pretty expensive as things go. I think they're excellent. They're modern and forward thinking and up to date and all of those kinds of great things, but they are expensive. And I'm wondering, does this lock us into using furniture through Corbett if we go with this contract?
It will not. You're right. Corbett is great, and when you go to their showroom and you look at the furniture, it's amazing. There may be some spaces in the building that we utilize their furniture. One of the things that we'll talk about in depth with Breslin is that when we look at the types of furniture, what is the most economical way for us to get it? And sometimes it's through school specialty or another provider. But I think the board knows me well enough at this point. We're not going to cheap it out, but we're also not going to, spend money that doesn't need to be spent. And a lot of times something that looks really nice or looks really innovative has very short lifespan. So we want to make sure that we get good quality furniture at good prices.
Okay. So despite the frequency of the name Corbett showing up in here, we're not bound to Corbett as a final provider. Do I have that correct?
Yes, Breslin has told us in our conversations they're open to whoever we would want to work with. Corbett may be one, and we may offer one other one that we want to go look at.
Okay. All right. Anyone else comments or questions? All right. The comments sounded universally positive, but just to double check, are members of the committee prepared to move this forward to the legislative meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So we'll move that forward on to item E, our transportation facility discussion. Andy.
Yes, so we are going to change direction a little bit here and talk about this item here. I want to give a little presentation on our transportation facility and begin a discussion about not only the current transportation facility, but an opportunity that I see to both improve the critical district facility and at the same time create some budget relief. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means throughout this presentation. Next slide, please, Brooke. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about our current transportation operations. For anyone that's not aware or anyone new that might be listening, our transportation operation is a critical and essential function of our school district. The transportation department consists of about 50 staff members made up of administrators, office staff, drivers, aides, and mechanics. And we also have about 50 vehicles in our fleet that are parked and maintained in our district facility. And every day, under normal circumstances, we transport about 3,500 students to our 6 public schools, 37 non-public schools, and various other events, field trips, sports activities throughout the day. Next slide, please, Brooke. So we currently operate out of a leased facility, which we've been leasing since June 2008, and our current lease ends on June 30th, 2021. The facility, I would say, if you've ever been past it on New Jersey Drive, is just in fair condition and is not something that we necessarily would ever want to invest any money into to modernize. So the way our lease agreement basically reads is we lease it, but we also have the burden of maintaining and putting any money in it to upgrade it and update the facility. The offices that we have are actually in a rented trailer that sit on the facility itself. So the next slide is actually some pictures of the current facility. Just in case you've never been there, you can see what it looks like. So the first picture on the left is basically the drive into the facility. You can see the huge pothole there on the left, and there's potholes throughout the facility here that we deal with. On the right side, you see in the back right there, and Brooke, you can actually just flip to the next side as well. You'll see it on the next slide, is the trailer in the background. So on the left slide, you'll see it here is a trailer facility that we have. And we have 4 staff, 3 full-time and 1 part-time staff that work out of that facility there. And then the picture on the right is the building. So the building is actually much larger on the space itself. We only operate basically out of this part of the building that you see here. So that gray door there you see is where the buses go in, and that's where the maintenance bay is that the mechanics work out of. Next slide, please, Brooke. So this is a snapshot of the cost of what we pay per year for this facility. So you can see it's broken into a couple pieces. We pay about $426,000 a year to lease the facility, broken down into a couple different areas. And then we pay about $30,000 per year estimated in personnel costs. So there's no fueling station here. So we've long had an agreement with Springfield Township, and just recently now we're fueling at the Wawa on Virginia Drive to fuel our vehicles because we don't have a station there. So it takes time and effort to drive to a location to fuel up. So in total, we're looking at over $450,000 a year to lease this facility. Next slide, Brooke. So I believe that there remains a great opportunity to take advantage of a plan that began in 2008 with the development of the Upper Dublin High School and to build a new facility. So Bob Lester was going through some old plans, and he found the original plans from the high school. And there are actually drawings on there of a plan to use, and Brooke, if you want to click on the drawing there from the Upper Dublin High School project down there. There are plans drawn out on basically the space between the Field of Dreams and Fort Washington Elementary School, where a transportation facility was planned to be at one point in time. And if that's not coming up, Brooke, we can go to the next slide because there's overhead drawings on the next slide. That's okay. So the good thing about it is it's land that the district already owns, and it's not currently being used. And there's really no plans to use it right now. So you can see here, this is an overhead drawing of the area. The outline in red are sort of the 2 main areas. Between them, there is a connecting road. So basically on the left side of this picture, if you've ever been back on this land, the red square on the left side was originally drawn up as where the buses would park. And then the rectangular area on the right side is where the transportation facility, the offices, the bay the maintenance bays would go on that side. So that's kind of what it looks like. Brooke, if you flip to the next picture. So these are on the ground pictures again back there. So the picture on the left, again, this is what was proposed as the bus parking area. You can see this is in the back. In the background here is 309 right behind it. So this kind of sits off back by itself. The picture on the right is the area that is closer to Lacauche Fields and the Fort Washington Elementary School. But again, it sits back off of that area and is sort of covered by some tree line there. So next slide, Brooke. So why now? Again, a new transportation facility has been in consideration since 2008. And then, so this need goes back 12 years. We knew we needed a facility. The district owns the land here, and we have no plan for it to be used. So that's the primary function here, is to make sure we're using all of our assets to the best of their ability. And right now, this is an asset that's just sitting completely unused. We are right now, as you just heard from Jamie Doyle, preparing for our largest borrowing for the Sandy Run project. And we have an opportunity to potentially add on to that borrowing. And as you also just heard, we are at all-time historically low interest rates. It is the perfect time if we wanted to borrow here to build this facility. So even more important, I think, Brooke, next slide, is that we're not looking just to add debt service and add expense to our general fund budget. As you'll hear later tonight, we've got a general fund budget that needs some work as well. If we look at adding $5 million potentially to build this facility, and again, we're in the beginning stages of this, so this is a truly an estimate of what we think it might take to build this facility. We would actually be able to accomplish that. The debt service that we would add annually would be less than what we're actually paying annually to lease this facility. So we would actually create some budget relief if we moved forward and stopped leasing and built our own facility to have on our land. So next slide, Brooke. So this slide just kind of gives you a feeling for what that might look like. The savings over time if we borrow this $5 million. Year one I actually have as an unknown, because what's going to happen right now where we're at, it's probably unlikely that this is going to be finished in full if we would decide to move forward with something by June 30th, 2021. So there would be some period where we would have a lease in place while we're building this facility. The lease ends on June 30, 21, so we would need to bridge that gap. But when you look at some of the details, the 5-year savings budget relief would be about $1 million, or about $250,000 a year in years 2 through 5. 10-year I have as still $1 million, because when you look at the comparison of $5 million, it's basically a break even in years 6 through 10. And then the 20-year savings model is about $2.3 million. Next slide, Brooke. So this slide, Brooke, if you can click on the link at the top, and hopefully this one goes through. So this is the full pro forma. So again, working with Jamie, kind of just get a sense of what an additional $5 million might look like. This pro forma does the full analysis to show you where those savings numbers that I actually showed you, how they actually show up per year. So, and again, if this doesn't come up, I encourage you to go check it out. But it's basically just all of the details of how I got to those numbers that I presented to you. So you can see the one column shows you the actual savings compared to our current, the current estimates that Jamie shared with us tonight to what adding $5 million in borrowing actually does. And then there's a column G that actually shows what the projected debt service looked like. Last year when PFM gave us our estimates of what this borrowing looked like, it's actually shaping up with interest rates so much lower that it'll be just that much better. But again, I don't want to make it seem better than it actually is. So on this chart where it says column F, when you can go back into the schedule, column F really shows you the true apples to apples, the schedule that Jamie presented to us tonight versus what the savings might be. So it's a true comparison. Okay, next slide, Brooke. So this last slide here is just, other considerations. One question that I get asked often is, well, okay, if you build this, what about if you ever move to an outsourced model of transportation? And the first thing I just want to say is there is no current discussion about moving to an outsourced transportation model, but it's a what if you ever did, what happens to this facility that you build? Isn't it better to lease? Well, if we would ever even consider that type of model, a third-party provider needs a location within the district to operate out of. So, you know, again, in past districts that I've worked for, we've had facilities on the campus that the contractor worked out of, and, you know, that works into the pricing of the contract. So there's still benefit to this, even if in the future there was a decision to move in that direction. So that's just something else to consider. The last slide is, I don't want to call it a timeline. It's sort of, you know, what comes next if we decide to move forward. So this is very preliminary. This is the first time we're sort of talking about this and hearing about this opportunity. But really what we're looking for from the board tonight is, if there's interest in this, we would need to move forward with getting an RFP. And really all that considers is receiving proposals from potential construction managers that would be interested in taking on a project like this, and reviewing those proposals. At that point, we would basically decide, do we want to approve a proposal or not? So if we receive proposals, there's nothing locking us into moving forward. We would just be receiving proposals. The other key piece to this next step is, we have the large borrowing happening next month. Basically, we're going to give PFM the direction on how much money we're willing to borrow in the next borrowing. We'll set our maximum parameters resolution. We could make a decision, if there's interest in exploring this option, to borrow an additional $5 million with that large borrowing. Now is the perfect time to add on to that, because we're not trying to accomplish bank qualified with this borrowing. And still not be locked into doing anything. It doesn't change our position. Basically what happens is, if we borrow the $5 million in November, and then this doesn't work out as we're sort of planning and working through this, all that would happen is we borrowed an extra $5 million for Sandy Run at historically low interest rates. And then the last borrowing next year, we should know everything, you know, basically everything we need to know at that point. We would just borrow $5 million less. So again, it's an idea, it's an opportunity. I think that's available to us to really consider right now. And I think there's a good opportunity here for the district. And then ultimately at the end, you know, if we decide to move forward with this, we would work with our construction manager, authorize a bid, and go out to bid on the project. So I will stop there and find out, you know, ask if there's any questions about the transportation facility proposal here.
All right, thanks, Andy. So to clarify, there's really two decisions that two board actions would be needed to make this happen. One would be to authorize an RFP, to look at the old plans, do a feasibility study, et cetera. And one would be to authorize Jamie to borrow approximately $5 million more. And we would presumably do that well before we got we would have to do that before we got the RFPs back. So, so it's really two separate board actions needed to implement this strategy.
Yes, and actually what I would say, Mark, I mean, the board can certainly take formal action, but I don't know that formal action is required to go out and solicit RFPs, right? We can solicit RFPs and just get proposals to look at. It would be approval of the RFP that would require formal board approval. But yes, there would be a formal action needed for next month to borrow an additional $5 million.
All right. Amy, go ahead.
Thank you. Andy, I appreciate the presentation and the detail, and that you went to some lengths to really set the stage for a conversation about a project which, as you mentioned, has been brought up a number of times over the years. And frankly, in the past, I don't know that we have done a great job in building the narrative and explaining to the community why this is important. So I do appreciate taking really good steps in that first part of that to do that. I think my first question would be really just a point of clarification about the RFP process. We've had some feedback from the community, and I've asked a number of times at different meetings through the Sandy Run process, you know, how can we make the RFP process more transparent and competitive? So can you just talk about what that process would look like?
Sure, yeah, I mean, we would, you know, we would work with our solicitor to really develop an RFP that, you know, a formal written documented RFP. We would certainly put it out to on our website for folks to grab, but we would also reach out to firms that we've worked with in the past, right? You know, we're currently working with Dewey, obviously has a history in the district. You know, we've worked with another firm that's done, you know, the Fort Washington roof. You know, so we would reach out and ask some firms if they were interested in bidding on, you know, in submitting a proposal, and then we would bring that back and sort of give the finance committee and board a review of all the proposals submitted to make a decision.
So it would just be a nice open process that involves a number of vendors, which
Correct.
is great. Thank you. One other quick thing, I thought the overhead was very helpful, but just as, again, another point of clarification for everybody watching, while it is adjacent to the Field of Dreams, it would not impact the use of the Field of Dreams, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Great, thanks very much.
Mike.
Hey, Andy, I wanted to clarify, since we weren't able to project the pro forma, year one, we're looking at a expense of approximately $260,000.
Hey, Mike, can I just interrupt you for a second? I just want everyone to have a chance to pull that up while you're talking.
Oh, okay.
It was a link from the presentation on slide number
13.
13.
Slide 13 at the top of the page. So if anyone wants to open that up and follow along. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Sure. No, absolutely. Year one, an expense of $260K with $190,000 of savings, and then years 2 through 5, $191,000 of costs with approximately $260,000 per year of savings over our current $456,000 of annual costs. Did I read that correctly?
You did. That is correct.
Okay. All righty. Yeah, that's a significant impact to the school district. So again, thank you for pulling this together. We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Stan.
Yeah, the location was, you know, as it's shown on one of the slides, that was it was planned to be there from the beginning, that the bus garage would be in those locations. So I think it's a great location. I think the road that runs parallel to 3 and 9 could also, I think, from what I understand, was beefed up to handle heavy, you know, the dump trucks and so on. So it could also handle the buses. I know Dewey did Springfield Township's maintenance garage right there off of Peppermill Road. I mean, we could tour that if Dewey does get an opportunity to take on this project. So I think it's I appreciate it, Andy, that you're getting this thing together, because I'm all for it. I think we need to act, especially if we're going to save some money, and that other facility is terrible. Lowers morale for our transportation department.
Jeff.
Thanks, Mark. Andy, really appreciate you laying this out and the effort you went through to put all these points before us. The one question I had was you mentioned potentially, if this were to go forward, having to bridge the gap with the lease. And a couple of questions. The lease term, either that we currently have, you know, is it year to year? How does that work? And when do you typically, or when would you think about opening negotiations? I'm just trying to get a sense of, if this were to go forward and we did have to bridge it, your sense of how that lease negotiation on an interim basis might go forward.
Yeah, so the facility that we lease, right now we're on a 2-year extension. So I haven't gone back through the other extensions to see how that's went, to see what time frame they were, but the one we're in now was a 2-year agreement that was approved and signed right before I got here. I have already been in touch with the folks that own the facility and manage the facility. And the feedback that I've received early on, not that, we've sort of discussed this as part of it, but that they would be willing to work with the school district for as long as we needed to stay in the facility, at least in the near term. So I think it would just be discussion with them, talk about what our needs are, and if this move forward, see if we can negotiate, a shorter term lease if they'd be open to that.
Okay, appreciate it. Many thanks.
Titia.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first one, the 5 million. Can you say a little bit more about where that comes from? I mean, what is it based on? Is that, are we looking at 5 million, or is this going to be a much bigger project as we go down?
So that's part of why we need to go through the RFP process before we can answer that. We don't have anything hard and fast. That's really just our best guess at what a facility like this could cost. Again, we're not looking, and again, this goes back to Dr. Yanni's point, about the furniture for the middle school. We're not looking for anything grand. We're looking for a facility that meets our needs, that is a better solution than where we're at today. So I think 5 million is probably a decent estimate, a rough estimate, but that's why we need to go through the RFP process.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Now the other question I had is, in a previous iteration of a facility, there was discussion of combining it with the township. So this one I think is a lot smaller, from what I understand. But it will include the fueling station, right? Because otherwise you would still have to go to Wawa, and you can fit all of that on that footprint. I mean, I went by there today to see the size and everything. So I was just curious, if the size is really fitting all the things you want to do there.
The plans that were originally drawn up when the high school was built fits everything that we need back in that area, including a fueling station. So again, we're referencing plans that were drawn 12 years ago, but yes, it all fit on those plans.
And so the fuel tanks could go in the ground there without.
I believe they were above the ground tanks,
okay.
But that again, that's something that would be part of the plan. But I do believe they were above ground.
Okay. Thank you.
For reference, again, on slide 7, there is a link to the old plans, and you can see where the fueling station would have been, which was over on the side that's further away from the elementary school. It's closer to 309. And you can see where the bulk of the bus parking and all the other significant components were in that plan. And again, it may not be that current plan just plain drops in and works, but it's a starting point at least. Art.
Just a couple of points, observations. There's a slide that states, I'm sure Mr. Robbins will appreciate my comments, that the facility meets current department needs, but is only in fair condition. I've been on that site numerous times, and it is a very challenging, it is, I think, an embarrassing facility. Mr. Robbins is laughing. And I think we really need to get off of that property. It is, to me, I'm not sure it really meets our needs. We get by, we survive at that site. I know there's been consistent flooding in the space that we do work on our buses. And just a reminder, our maintenance crew also works out of that building. So I don't think it's not in fair condition. It's in very poor condition, in my opinion. The other point I want to make is when we start looking at the costs over the next 10 to 20 years, every time we renew the lease, there is an increase. Costs will continue to grow. And Andy, I'm not sure you've assumed that there will be additional costs in the facility. And also, when we decided to not use this site previously, we spent a number of years looking at other sites in the township, and we were unable to find any other sites that would be appropriate and would be reasonable in terms of the costs. We would have to buy the land, This option provides us with land that is already owned by the district. And I think when we start working on the RFPs, I know there were some concerns that were mentioned previously about being close to Fort Washington. And I think a lot of those concerns we can include into the RFP in terms of where the buses are, where the fumes are. And I think this would really work out well in the future and would solve our problem forever. And I'm sure Mr. Robbins would agree that this would be an excellent location and would really work out well. And it's a site that we would. It's a fair site. I'm not going to say it's a fantastic site, but it's something that our drivers that come in every day, I think they're embarrassed when they pull in and watch out for the potholes and watch out for the rain and the security on that site. So, I'm really strongly supporting that we at least move forward with an RFP.
Darlene.
Yes, I just want to agree that I think it's important for us to move forward with the feasibility study. I really don't see any downside to moving forward to find out if indeed this would become a permanent solution for us, because I know, finding, a place for our buses and for everything that we need to do has been of concern in the past. So I definitely support moving forward. My concern is that, as was already mentioned, we're talking about borrowing the $5 million, even though we're not sure exactly what it would cost. And if indeed we need to do the borrowing next month, is it prudent for us to make sure that we have a number that's more than just an estimate, something that may be truer to cost, so that if we need to borrow more, that we can do it at these low rates?
So I think that question really is it possible to get a more accurate number by the time we need to lock in, or we would like to lock in our borrowing?
Right, because if indeed it's going to be $6 million, I want to borrow the $6 million when the costs are really low, the rates are low. So if we can, through this feasibility study and whatever the timeline is, if we can have a truer number, I think it's important for us to get that so that we know what we need to borrow next month.
So I think if we go through the RFP process, there is simply no way we're going to have that answer in time. There might be a way to short circuit that if we really felt that was important, by hiring someone directly and assuming that the plan will work. I'm nervous about that kind of assumption. But Andy, help me out here. Am I on the right track here?
So I think, you are on the right track. I suppose we could go find someone that could come in and see if they can put together a very rough sketch to say, hey, $5 million is right or it's not. The other thing I would say to that, and again, I know, I understand your question, Dr. Davis, but we do have, I would say we still do have flexibility. So if we borrow that $5 million right now, the plan of the Sandy Run Middle School project is to borrow $35 million now and $10 million next year. 10 million being to achieve the bank qualified status, for preferential interest rates, for interest rates that are lower. If we borrow an additional $5 million now, that means we only have to borrow $5 million for Sandy Run next year, potentially, if the project even, makes it to the full budget amount, which would still leave us about $5 million in room to spare next year and still achieve the bank qualified borrowing, which is preferential interest rates. So I think, we could make it work. We could try and figure out how to get a price for next month, but I still do see flexibility even in this model.
Yeah, I guess for me, the bottom line is I don't see any harm in borrowing the money, because if we decide not to go forward with it, we're still going to use it for the Sandy Run. So to me, I'd rather borrow, knowing that we're going to use it one way or the other, as long as we're getting it at those low rates.
Are you advocating we should pick a bigger number? Is that what you're suggesting? Or
I just, I mean, whatever information they can pull together to get, as our best guess, and borrow that amount, because then we can use it for the project. And if we decide not to move forward, we're going to be using it for Sandy Run anyway. So any way we can take advantage of the low interest rates that are out there right now, I think is prudent for us as we move forward.
so, Andy, is there a way to sanity check that number before next month? Before next Monday, I mean?
I mean, the only way would be to go hire someone now to do some work for us, right? I mean, I don't know that there's a way for us to sanity check that number.
Yeah, I don't think that we should do that. If you're, and again, Andy, I'm going to trust, if you think 5 million is a good number for us, then I'm certainly supportive of that number. I just don't want us to shortchange ourselves. If you're saying 5 million because, it sounds like a comfortable number, but if you are satisfied with 5 million, then I certainly support that.
Yeah, and I guess my response to that, Dr. Davis, is, again, if $5 million is not enough, and let's just say, I'm making our best guess based on what we know that 5 million is enough. If it's $7 million, just hypothetically, if it's $8 million, we will still have that room within the next borrowing that we have planned to fill that gap in. So I think there's still, we're not losing out. Yes, we'd be potentially missing out on historically low rates, but the next borrowing is bank qualified, which is, lower rates anyway by the nature of the borrowing. So I don't feel like we're losing anything by not borrowing the whole hypothetically $8 million now.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
All right, Jen. You're muted, Jen.
I think it's my headphones. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I understand the financial argument that right now is the time to borrow that money, and that seems like a pretty good idea. Can you give me, and I'm not sure, any idea what the timeline would look like when we are making these decisions? Because I'm sure the community will want to have input, about what goes into the RFP and those types of things. So we're talking about this now. Are we voting on it this month? And then what happens?
So you're not voting, at least from my perspective. You
Okay.
certainly can vote to move forward with an RFP, but we're not voting on anything necessarily this month. The RFP process is what will give us all that information. So as proposals come back, we will review the proposals, and those proposals will have tentative timelines about how the project would roll out. So that would sort of be all part of the evaluation of the proposals that are submitted. So right now, this is really just a conversation about should we start this process or should we not, and then the RFP will really lay out the details.
Can I clarify something, Andy, because I may have misspoken earlier, I may have misunderstood. So this month at the legislative meeting for the borrowing, we already discussed earlier tonight that we will have on the agenda an authorization to proceed for the team to put all that together. Do we set the dollar amount of the borrowing as part of that, or do we set the borrowing amount as part of the maximum parameters resolution next month?
So Jamie, can you jump in and help answer that one just to make sure if you're still on?
I'm still on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks, Jamie.
Great. So, in a perfect world, you would big picture decide if you want to include the 5 million in this example when you pass the motion on Monday. However, if you did need more time to think about the 5 million, I think we just ultimately have to know before we came back with that parameters resolution, because it would have to be included in that. And, that was slated for your November 23rd meeting.
Right. So it sounds like we could potentially, if the committee likes it, and then the board on Monday include 5 million, still take the time to sanity check it before November 23rd. And if it turns out that 5 million just is off the mark, then we can make an adjustment on November 23rd if necessary.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have anything else there, Jen, or is that?
Well, so deciding what goes into the RFP, the community still has time. Right now, we're just talking about should we borrow this money or not, and nothing else.
But
Right.
the RFP is not about the design of the facility or anything. The RFP is asking a firm or firms to come back to us with a proposal for what the facility could look like and where it would sit on the space. It's not for us to tell them. In a way, we're asking their professional opinion on how to do the project and if it lines up with those old drawings. Is that, sorry to step in, Mark, but I wasn't sure you guys were getting her question.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andy, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Did that answer the question, John?
Well, do you want to talk about when the community will have time to input? Is that the other piece that you're asking
Yeah, I guess
about?
I'm just trying to get my mind around the timeline. Like, I understand the money, but there'll be other decisions. And what does that timeline look like?
I think that timeline comes out of the RFP process as well. I don't think we can answer that right now. We can encourage the administration to pursue the RFP, and when those come back in a few weeks, we would have a lot more knowledge to answer that question.
Okay.
Art, oh, you've lowered your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Ms. Doyle, kind of tweaking would have to be done with the language of the documents if we're including the garage.
Correct.
So I think what, Jamie, we would change that 35 million to 40 million as the placeholder now, if the board was interested in continuing this discussion. And then if we wanted to, change that dollar amount, we could revise that in the final maximum parameters resolution that we approve in November, correct? Would it be better to include the 40 million now and then pull back on that with the maximum?
That's entirely up to you.
Okay. So it's really just the number, the amount that we're authorizing to borrow right now, Dr. Levino. It's in the motion that we would change. It's 35 million right now, and what Jamie presented, we would increase it to 40 million if there was interest in continuing this discussion.
Okay, so what I think I've heard, Titia, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, in the past, when there was borrowing going on, there was some discussion about Moody's rating and things like that. Is that going to be impacted if you go from 35 to 40, or is that really not a concern?
That is a great question, but I'm not too concerned about an additional 5 million. You're still well within your legal borrowing capacities. And Moody's will appreciate that you're having the foresight to have this conversation in the spirit of, lowering your overall cost in your operating budget. I mean, they like when you think outside the box and save money.
Okay, so to wrap that up, so let me summarize. I think what we're saying is we are, and I'll check with the rest of the committee on this, we are recommending that we amend our previous motion that will advance to the legislative meeting around the borrowing amount from 35 million to 40 million. We would recommend that the administration pursue the RFP as suggested, although no formal board action is necessary for that. It sounds like we would also recommend a rough sanity check of the dollar amount on the assumption that the plan would work. So basically, how much does it cost to pave, build a pole barn, install the fueling center, stripe the lot, all that stuff, on the assumption that no significant land development is necessary and that plan will basically work. And with the understanding that that assumption is an assumption, and we all know what that means. Is that correct from the rest of the committee? Is that what we're recommending here?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
All right. Okay, great. So thank you all for that thorough discussion. Jamie, thank you for hanging out for that and clarifying for us. Let's move on to the next item, purchase of additional security cameras.
Yes, Mr. Lester is certainly going to help me out with this, but I'm going to kick it off. So we're looking to purchase some additional security cameras with some grant funding that we have under Act 44. So Act 44 put in place some funding to assist school districts address safety and security issues. We want to use this grant funding to install some additional security cameras district-wide. The total grant that we have is $45,000, and we're looking to work with Access Security to purchase and install and integrate with our current systems that are in place. We're going to be making this, the suggestion is to purchase this off of CoStars, so we don't have to go out to bid for this, but because it exceeds bidding limits, it's something certainly we want to bring to the board and make sure the board is aware of. So Mr. Lester, if you want to add anything to you know, why we think the purchase of additional cameras is important for us, that would be great.
Yes, we feel the coverage in several of our buildings, predominantly the elementary schools, it could really be improved. And this is a good opportunity for safety, security of the students, the staff, that these cameras are in. We're looking at additional coverage, interior hallways, some exterior cameras to get better perspective of areas outside that we think are critical to look at. Access Security is the provider of our cameras now. All of our licensing agreements go through Access Security. They've been very reliable, been a good partner with us in the past. So we just think this is really a worthwhile project that will help security inside our buildings. You know, if anything were to ever happen, it would be able to give us real-time monitoring of a situation, or going back and putting pieces together if something smaller happened.
All right. Thank you both. Comments or questions? Art.
Quick comment that over at Eastern, we are looking at additional security, actually modifying our security system at Eastern, and we are also working with Access. They have an excellent reputation, and I was pleased to see that, you know, that upper government is also using them.
Anyone else? So there was buried in there, I want to make sure the board heard it, a question about purchasing through existing purchase agreements rather than going out to bid. I'm personally comfortable with that. I just want to make sure no one else has a comment to make on that. Art, is your hand up on that topic, or just still up? Just still up. Anyone else? Okay, so members of the committee will move that one forward.
Yes.
All right,
Mhm.
thank
Yes.
you. There's a discussion of more asbestos at Sandy Run.
Yes, this is more of an informational subject I just wanted to bring up. So we are very open with everybody about this. A little bit of background, the AHERA Act that we use for guidance, it's actually required for the school districts for asbestos. It's back in the 1980s, Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act. Required a full-scale inspection of the buildings and to put together a management plan. After that plan was put together, we were required to do periodic inspections every 6 months just to document conditions, and a re-inspection every 3 years. And we've been doing that. But before we began the project, this current project at Sandy Run, we wanted to include asbestos removal in the bid. So we wanted to get the best information that we can. So we actually hired Element Environmental to perform a very detailed inspection of both buildings, the annex building and the middle school, the main building. And it was including climbing in ceilings, that they had to drill a hole in the wall to do that. We wanted to know as much as we can. During their investigation, they found in the planetarium some fireproofing that they believe will contain asbestos if it was tested. Looking back, the best that we can find out that there was more of this in the room. About 20 years ago when they replaced the dome, they had an abatement process to scrape it off the walls. What was found in the latest inspections is, yes, there is a little bit there in inaccessible areas. The problem is we can't get to it to test it. We can't get to it to remove it without lowering the dome, removing ductwork. So it'd be a pretty major expense just to get to this to figure out what it contained. If it was asbestos containing or what parts per million of asbestos are actually in it. So on the latest report, they noted it as damaged, which sent a red flag up. Spoke with Element Environmental, said the reason they listed as damaged is because there was an abatement at once and this was left over. So anything that was left over, they considered damaged because it was, at some point, part of it was touched. So it's pure speculation based on safety that they're listing us as damage. So we asked them to come back to us with a proposal. What can we do about this? It's not feasible to start tearing apart the planetarium to try to get to this. And their recommendation is a 6-month air sampling. So they gave us a proposal. They'll come out every 6 months when they do their 6-month inspection for us, that they'll take air samples. And if they detect any asbestos in the air, that's when we move to our next step, whatever that may be. So it's only $1,200 for this year. It'll be cheaper in future years. This is the only reason it's a little more expensive. This October, we're going to take the sample next week, and it's because the person has to come back. They have to travel in. It's their lab time. If we include it on our 6-month inspection that they're normally here, so back in April when they're back again, the price drops down to $350 because they're already on site, and it's just a matter of taking a sample and getting a quick turnaround, looking at it through a microscope and sending out to a lab if necessary. So we just want to be really upfront with this information about what's going on. We don't anticipate any hazard. It's material that's been there for, we don't know how long, probably when the room was built. It was just something that was found because of this detailed inspection preparing for the demolition of the building. And because they are listing it as damaged, we wanted to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps to make sure that the room is safe.
Okay, thanks. So Bob, if one of those 6 months inspections came back and did find something in the air samples, what would we do then?
We'd have to have some good discussions whether or not we spend money to do demolition, or depending when they find it, do we just close the planetarium down till the end, till demolition? So it'll be a discussion that we would have to have based on findings.
So that would be enough. We can close off the room and
yeah, you could just seal off the room, and maybe we can come up with a creative way to encapsulate it. But right now, the first step is just to see if there's anything in the air.
All right, and you don't need action from us. You're just
no. We just want to present this as information, just to be upfront, to let everybody know what is going on.
Any comments or questions from the committee or the board? I see none. All right. Well, thank you for that update. Hopefully, when would we expect to see the first sample?
They are coming out next week. I think it's either 26th or the 28th, and we should have an answer within 48 hours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on to item H, a donation from UDJAA.
Yes, UDJAA, my client specifically I've been working with, reached out to us, and this is a project I think that's been in the works for some time now, are looking to make a donation to the district on a baseball field that only UDJAA uses. They're looking to upgrade and install a new backstop there and to replace some batting cages on our campus. UDJAA has gotten all the proposals. They're going to pay for and do all the work. Bob Lester has reviewed it and supports it from a facilities perspective. But because of the cost of the project and it being a donation of almost $27,500, it's something that the board would need to accept before we can authorize them to start doing that work. So this is for the board to accept the donation from UDJAA for this work.
All right, I will also call attention that it is in addition to the donation, they would like to put a plaque to commemorate Neil Fitzpatrick, who was a longtime director of UDJAA on that field. Any comments or questions from the committee or the board? Art?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank UDJAA for working collaboratively with the district. This is a case where everybody benefits. That UDJAA realizes that the backstops some needs to be improved, and they're using the field most of the time, and it's just another example of the collaboration that we do work with UDJAA, and they, along with other of our community partners, did also donate to the turfing at Sandy Run Middle School, to the turf field. So again, thank you UDJAA for everything you do.
Amy.
I just wanted to acknowledge also Mike Klein at UDJAA and their team. It's been, like for every organization, a really difficult time, and I know they are another group of tireless volunteers, so really just appreciate their work, and there's really nothing better than being out in the fall and spring when we can see our kids out there on the fields and doing what they love. So I'm just all in favor of allowing this to move forward.
All right, anybody else? Well, I'll just echo those comments. I think I speak for the whole board, certainly speak for myself when I say we really appreciate the relationship that the district has had for many, many years with UDJAA, and hope it can continue. So members of the committee, Art, is your hand still up or again? All right, so members of the committee will move this forward to accept this donation.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. And moving on to item I, the monthly financial reports. Andy.
Yes, just a couple of highlights here. Nothing on the treasurer's report. Certainly I'll answer questions at the end if you have any on that report. But on the other financial report package, a couple highlights. Page 2, I think it's noteworthy to note here that we lost over $2 million in assessed value from last month to this month due to the annual appeal process. So that's folks, homeowners, commercial properties, assessing their, appealing their assessed value to Montgomery County Board of Assessments and having their assessment lowered. So that equates to about $70,000 in lost tax revenue. Page 3 is the tax collection percentage. And again, just to note, that's something I've been watching is the collection percentage. So through September, we have collected 89.6% versus 91.3%. Which is about 1.7% behind the prior year. So again, I assume that will continue to trend lower through December because we don't have a penalty fee this year, but we will continue to watch that closely. Page 4 shows our EIT collection information, and we continue to collect basically in line to slightly ahead of where we were last year. Again, we're just watching trends at this point. Our tax collector, Berkheimer, continues to estimate a loss of $50,000 in EIT per month. We're just not seeing that right now. So again, we're watching that closely. September, you can see, was a little ahead, but October, don't pay attention to that too much because that's only through a couple days in October compared to a full month last year. And the last on page 6, to note here, so page 6 and 7 are our CARES grant funding that we've received this year. So this is where we're tracking all of our expenditures. And basically we have 3 sources, one being new of CARES grant revenue that's coming in. This first one is the PCCD grant. That grant had to be spent by October 31st. So you can see that we've fully expended all the $277,827 as of basically the beginning part of October. The other source that was already available to us is the CARES ESSER funding. The nice thing about the CARES ESSER funding is it gives us a little flexibility as those funds, we basically have out until the 21-22 school year. I believe it's September 2022 that we have to spend those funds until. So that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to say, and we're going to hold some of that money aside and potentially use that to purchase cleaning and necessary disinfecting supplies in next year's budget. We'll continue to monitor that. And what gives us that flexibility is we've recently were notified about a new source of funding that's going to be coming to us through Montgomery County. The county received CARES funding, and they've allocated $15 million out to school districts. And our allocation was a little over $238,000. So again, that's a source of funding. We have until December 31st to spend that. So we're continuing to look at what our needs are as we move forward. Now, the one question, just to make sure, because I know it gets asked regularly, is what is this going to cost us? What is that going to cost us in a run rate? And we still don't, while we've spent money, we still don't have that answer, because we're purchasing cleaning supplies. We're making sure we have enough supplies to get through this year. But until we have students back in schools, we don't really have any information on how quickly it's going to be used. So that's something, again, like I've said, we will continue to monitor how it's used when we have students back in buildings. And we have much broader cleaning going on, after students are here for the day. So that's kind of what's going on with our grant funding. So I'll take any questions about any of the financial reports at this time.
All right, thank you. So comments or questions from the committee or the board? Art, go ahead.
Yeah, Andy, has there been a need, or are you thinking that there may be a need to hire additional custodians over the next few months, or are we in good shape?
We are not looking at this time at a need to hire additional custodians. We believe we are adequately staffed at this time.
Okay, great. The CARES money from Montgomery County, I see we also have the category teaching and learning, just like we did on the other funding. We will be able, and so what are some of the ideas to use the $238,000, and how long do we have to at least allocate those funds, to encumber the funds?
So again, that's sort of a brand new funding source. So we're still working through the what, but we have until December 31st to spend those funds.
Okay. It could be used on Chromebooks or things like that.
Basically, all the sources of funds have a very similar usage. So it's cleaning, disinfecting, supplies and equipment that we need to operate in the new normal, all that type of stuff. Yes.
But also technology? I mean, additional technology?
When I say equipment, yes. I mean, equipment in the classrooms, cleaning equipment, technology equipment. Yes, you got it. Anything to support the new normal.
Okay.
If I could also interject, not that it's out of this pool of money, but we do have a couple staff members that will be taking leaves, and so there'll be increased personnel costs. And at the elementary level, we're also adding a few long-term subs so that we can reduce class sizes to ensure distancing, appropriate distancing between kids.
So would these funds be appropriate to offset some of those expenses? Staffing?
Potentially, but I'm sorry, Andy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, it's possible that the county money could, but again, even if it can, it's only good through December 31st. So it's a very small window of time that we have to actually spend those dollars.
Yeah, it's one-time funds for one-time costs, preferably. Yep. Yeah, I mean, but that does echo an inevitable question that I don't see, cleanly covered here. Because there's no clean way to cover it. How much is COVID costing us? I know that I'm sure lots of people have that question here and elsewhere. Is there any way to put a finger on that?
Well, it's cost us $277,827 so far this year, right? But like I said, that's what we've spent to prepare we don't know how quickly the supplies that we have are going to be used up.
Yeah. All right.
That's the best answer I can give you at this point.
Yeah, no, I understand that there isn't an answer yet. Any other comments or questions on the monthly financials? All right, thank you. So members of the committee will put those on the legislative agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't hear Stan, but that's enough.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to the next year's budget, Andy, the 5-year assumptions.
Yes, I'm going to try and move through this briefly, just because this is early in the process. But basically, last month we began discussions about the 21-22 budget planning process with the proposed timeline. Tonight, what I have before you is all of the assumptions that we are going to be building into the preliminary version of the budget. So again, all these are sort of built into the draft that I have at the end, but this is what we're starting with to start to build out that 21-22 preliminary budget. So this is sort of a first look. And you can see it's laid out into a couple different sections. Again, the general assumptions, you can see all the things that we have built into the general assumptions. Throughout this document, you'll see early on in the year, we're talking about looking at steady enrollment, not really looking at making any major changes to enrollment. Staffing that is basically status quo to our current budget year over year, and then basing increases on current bargaining agreements, contractual agreements, benefits that are based on what we know about benefits trends. So, an 8% trend for medical benefits. So this is just all of basically the baseline stuff that we are building into that look out of the budget for next year. Under the revenue, Sandy we talked about the debt service and that increase that's going in. Under the revenue section, basically all of these items are things that we spent a lot of time talking about last year. And really, it's so early in the process that we're still monitoring trends and impacts of COVID, right? So that was one of the biggest things we dealt with at the end of last year with the budget was we knew what to anticipate for potential revenue reductions, but we're still monitoring to see what's happening. So this is all of the baseline information that we're building into the budget for next year. I think the key one here just to keep our eye on is Act 1, the Act 1 index has been finalized at 3%, so that's the calculation. In the preliminary version of the budget, that's just the placeholder that's in there. It's nothing more than a placeholder at this point, but that's, I think, an important point just to note that we have 3% in the projections at this point. Under state revenues, and again, I'll come back and answer any questions you have if there's anything you want to drill into. I'm just hitting the highlights. Under the state revenues, again, the typical model here for the state side of the budget is to just use the current year budget and roll that forward. There's a couple areas that I'm not doing that for next year, even at this early point. The transportation subsidy is something that is a huge calculation that goes into the transportation funding that we get from the state. And basically the way it works, to keep it very simple, is in the 2021 school year, this year that we're in, we're going to receive a subsidy based on the calculation of the services that we provided last year. So this year's subsidy will look very normal to prior years. If everything stays the same and the calculation doesn't change, which I have no reason to believe it won't, next year's subsidy will be substantially less than what we received this year. Because the way the subsidy works, without getting into too much of the weeds, days of services provided, we're going to provide significantly less days of service this school year than the standard 180 days, and the number of students that are on our vehicles or enrolled on our vehicles, since we're running vehicles, especially in non-publics, that are significantly less than what we've done in past years. We have an opt-out for our public school students when when it's time to come back to school. So we're looking at running buses with 70% less students potentially than what we have in the past. And that's all going to impact that subsidy. So again, not a huge number, but it's a change that we're making. And then the CARES grant funding is obviously went to zero, but that was one-time funding. The property tax reduction is something that we will certainly talk about more as we progress through the year, because there's certainly risk of the homestead dollars going down as well this year. And then federal is just a natural reduction. On the expenditure side, again, I talked about most of this. I think the big thing I want to hit on the expenditure side is PSERS. The rate's not certified yet, but it's around 35%. So again, the rate at which it's going up is flattening out, but it's still 35% of our total salary dollars are being paid into PSERS, which is an enormous number. And the last thing I'll point out is cyber charter schools is having a huge impact on us right now. So basically where we're at right now is we currently have about 44 Upper Dublin students enrolled in cyber charter schools as compared to 13 last year. Every student that enrolls in cyber charter costs us about almost $18,000. And if the student requires special education services, that amount increases to $38,000. So basically we're looking at, if enrollment stays steady throughout the year in cyber charter schools, we will spend slightly over $1 million this year on cyber charter as compared to the budgeted amount of $365,000. So that's $640,000 of additional costs. So I have that built into the preliminary version of the budget, again, assuming status quo, and that's something we will obviously continue to monitor very, very closely throughout the year. So if you scroll down to the last page, Brooke, the major budget increases basically show the 6 major areas increasing expenditures, almost $5.2 million. And we're looking at, in the preliminary budget, having about 4.3 of that offset by property tax revenue, partially from the 3% increase that we have in there, partially from a couple things. One that's a positive, finally, the prudential tax credit, that settlement is finally over next year. So we'll see about a $700,000 pickup from the prudential tax credit going away, and about $1.2 million with the increase in the collection rate. Again, I moved that back to 97%, the total collection rate on property tax revenues, from the reduction of 95.3. And again, that's something we will continue to monitor. So the last thing I'll just mention is attached to this, there's a link to the projection model. So certainly, I don't necessarily want to walk through this whole model, but it's there. Take a look at it. The key point there, again, we're starting from a deficit of 3.8 million. We're adding a net deficit of about 875,000 to that with the way the budget stands for next year right now. So we're looking at a starting place of about a $4.5 million budget deficit. But again, I'll point out, it's something certainly that we need to keep our eye on and be aware that that's a big number. This is our starting place. So that's what we'll work off of moving forward. So again, that's just a quick summary of where we're at on the budget process. Certainly we'll continue to talk more about this, especially next month when we talk preliminary budget and how we move forward with either the opt-out resolution or a preliminary budget to approve exceptions. So I'll stop there and take any questions that anyone has.
Okay, right. So no formal action for the board to take or the committee, but this is obviously a big core of what we do. These assumptions drive a lot of the upcoming budget process. Any comments or questions on them from the committee or the board? Art, go ahead.
Yeah, two concerns that I wanted to bring to the attention of the board. One is the cyber charter school tuition rates. Charter school tuition rates have not changed for over 20 years. And ironically, cyber charter schools, the tuition rate is based on the same calculation that is used for brick and mortar charter schools. This has been an issue that has been upfront with PSBA and with PASBO, Andy's organization. And we were getting close to getting some changes in the legislation in Harrisburg, but then COVID hit. So I urge our community and my colleagues on the board to continue to advocate 4 true hybrid school reforms in the upcoming year, and we were getting real close. The other item that I know that the SBA and PAS was working on is trying to find a solution with transportation subsidies. I know that we've been working together to meeting with legislators to point the issues out about the challenges that we'll all face with the reimbursement. But Andy, the third one, there wasn't 3, but there really is 3. I am really concerned about the homestead reduction. I think that's approximately a $350 tax credit, tax deduction that everybody gets in the homes that are done. It was saved at the last minute. I am really concerned that we're not going to see that happen next year with the state that, that our state is, the condition that our state is conditioned. I think that's the greatest concern I have facing us. An additional $360 is a huge amount, and that affects individuals who pay a very small amount or those that pay a significant amount. It's the same $360 that will be added onto your tax bill. That's really scary for me right now.
Let's clarify that is a pass-through savings for the district. That is not a district budget concern. That is an individual taxpayer concern. And so this is something for everybody to pay attention to and advocate with your legislators. This is not a school district function like the other.
Right, Mark. And we used to call it the gambling money. So it's the gambling money that comes in, and then that gets credited back to all districts in the state. Well, last year when all the casinos shut down, there was no gambling money. I don't think this year there's going to be much gambling money. Granted, some casinos have been opening, but not to the extent that we had 2 years ago. So it's going to be a real issue.
Teacher.
Yeah, I want to follow up a little bit on what Art, I think, was getting at. Is there any legislation that you can foresee that could hugely impact your assumptions at the moment?
None that I'm aware of at this point in time. Again, PASBO, our state organization, keeps a pretty close eye on that, and things have been pretty quiet on the legislative front right at the moment.
Thanks.
Anyone else, comments or questions on the budget assumptions? Andy, I'm curious about the property tax collection rate change. I mean, I'm optimistic that it will return, and you seem to be as well, but can you talk a little bit about why you think that that's an appropriate prediction?
Well, 97% has historically been around our collection rate. We're anywhere from 97.25 to 97.5% is our collection rate. So it's still below where we typically are. We'll watch that. The other thing that happens with that is the less we collect gets turned over as delinquent. So there would be more delinquent to collect. So it sort of starts to balance itself out. But it's certainly a concern of mine that we'll continue to watch, Mark. But right now, that's what I felt was most appropriate to kind of plug into the preliminary version.
All right. All right.
Yeah, and you indicated that our total assessments have gone down approximately 230 million. What was the number?
Just this last month, the assessed value dropped by $2 million in assessed value. About 70,000 in taxes.
$2 million. I mean, so even when we get some developments that come up like Sprouts, the Enclave, it's going to take a long time before we make up those assessment appeals. And I'm sure, Andy, there's more of that that we're going to have to deal with in the future. So, good news is, we're not including any of the new developments in the assessments. And I know, Andy, you keep repeating that, and I appreciate that. But with the assessment appeals being successful, and it's continues to create a challenging situation for Upper Dublin and many other districts across the state.
Do we know if that amount of approvals this month is that? I mean, $70,000 in tax revenue is not nothing, but we've obviously ignored worse at times. Is that a lot relative to? Is everyone else experiencing these as well right now?
That's a good question. You mean across districts?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that across districts, but I would assume it's probably pretty steady across. We meet as a Montgomery County business group on a weekly basis right now. So that's actually a good question. I can ask and see if I can get more
Those
info on
districts
that.
that are very reliant on malls, large malls, are feeling the pain right now. I mean, it's really, Upper Marion, I guess it's King of Prussia. Those malls are a very challenging situation right now.
All right, other comments or questions on budget assumptions? None. All right, thank you. So let's move on. We have 3 settlement stipulations.
Speaking of assessment appeals, yes. So we have 3 before us tonight. Actually, one is a good one, believe it or not. So the first one is, and I'll just take all 3 and then I'll answer questions at the end on all 3. 455 Maryland Drive is an assessment appeal that the owner appealed. It was approved by Montgomery County Board of Assessment for a reduction, but the owner wasn't on board with the reduction. They thought it should be more, so they appealed it. We've worked with our experts on our side, and we believe that this is a reasonable settlement to come to on this property. Again, we work very closely with our solicitor's office, and we have a firm that we use for appraisals, so they work hand in hand with us. They're really the experts behind this. And we believe this is a fair settlement, but these are the reductions. I will note that 2021 is on this now. So once we cross sort of that August time frame, not only is it the 2020 tax year, which is this tax year that we're in, the settlement also sort of rolls out into the next tax year as well. So that's why you see the 2021 year on all of these. The second one, 1145 Virginia Drive, is actually a district-initiated assessment appeal. So back in 2018, the district went through and evaluated properties district-wide, and some have already settled. This is a one that's been in an appeal for a number of years now, and we have finally reached an agreement with the owner to settle at a market value of $6.4 million, up from the current market value of $5.4 million. So we see actually that market value needs to be updated. That's a typo, so I will update that. It's actually 5.4 million is the current market value, so that didn't get in there correctly. So what that means for us is we'll have one-time revenue of about $263,000 come in, which is a good thing, and then about $80,000 on an annual basis. So that's a win for the district. The one piece of this that I just want to make sure is transparent. The district doesn't have the ability to go do this analysis on its own. So a firm called Keystone was hired to do this work, and part of that agreement was they collect only what actually goes through as a revenue increase for the district. So 25% of 3 years will go to them. So we will owe them some money, about $65,000. But again, that's, when you look at the overall increase, it's a win for the district going forward. And then the last one is a residential property, 8 Stonington Court. Again, this is just a mutual agreement. It results in a tax loss of about $1,500 a year. And again, we believe this is a reasonable settlement. So I'll stop there and take any questions on these properties.
All right, comments or questions? Titia.
Just a question. Both K and M are losses, right? But one in the column that says loss has a negative, and the other one in the column that says loss has a positive. And I wasn't sure I understood that.
You're right. We'll fix that. That's a typo.
Okay, great.
Stan.
Yes. On the, I'm looking at the Maryland Drive assessment. Going forward for 2022, would that also be a tax loss of $18,977, or what would that amount be? Do you think you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, it stays pretty similar, Stan, but what happens is every year the millage rate changes, so it's gonna adjust accordingly as our millage rate changes. So I would say it's probably around 18,000 going forward, probably slightly a little bit more as the millage goes up.
Okay, and on the Virginia 1145 Virginia Drive, the legal team that's representing us, their fee is based on the amount that they're getting back for for Upper Dublin. That's what their fee is based on. You said 25%.
Yeah, so let me make sure that was clear. We work with a solicitor on all assessment appeals. So that's sort of our legal expert for the district initiated evaluation of the township and those district initiated appeals. We hired a firm that did that evaluation and identified the properties, and any of those properties that moved forward and we settle, they've received 25% of 3 years worth of tax pickup.
Okay. And then on the Stonington Court, is that a residential house property?
That's a residential, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, gosh, based on from what I hear, the houses are in Upper Dublin are already lasting on the market like a week. I mean, do you think that that price is a good price for us?
Well, the numbers behind this, there's sales data that's being looked at. There's appraisals that are done. So there's information that sits behind this that the district is certainly evaluating. So yes, this is when we evaluated it with our experts. It was in line.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you.
All right, other comments or questions on the assessment appeals? Okay, so with the changes to the market value column for Virginia Drive and the sign on the tax loss for Maryland Drive, we'll move this forward to the legislative meeting.
Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And our final item N, our transportation bid.
Yeah, so typically in June, we approve all district supply bids for the following year. We had that long list when we went over it in June. In prior years, we've never completed a bid for transportation. And this is something that Chris Robbins, our Director of Transportation, identified as an area of improvement and potential opportunity to purchase more efficiently, save money on parts. So he moved forward this year, working with his staff to put together a bid for transportation parts and supplies. And they've done a nice job of that this year. We expect this to expand into the future. So basically on a couple items that he looked at, the savings are estimated to be about $1,200. So again, kudos to them for the work that they've done on this. And again, $1,200 might not seem like a lot, but every little bit helps as we start to evaluate areas for opportunities.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. And just to clarify, sometimes when we see bid results, we see lots of vendors all bidding on the same thing, but these are prices for different items, right?
These are prices for different items, right? These are the vendors that were awarded based on the items in the bid.
Right. All right, any comments or questions on the transportation bids? Amy?
I just think it's been since, initially when Dr. Yanni got here, and then also since you've come on board, Andy, and brought the team on board, the leadership team, that it's been an ongoing process of getting better at identifying these areas. And I just, from a board perspective, really appreciate is the word I was looking for. Really appreciate the efforts to do that because lots of small pickups become large. So thanks to everybody for doing that.
Absolutely agree. Anyone else? All right, so members of the committee will move that one forward to the legislative meeting?
Yes.
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 And yes, all right. Thank you very much. We are up to community input. So if members of the community who are attending the meeting would like to address the committee, please raise your hand and I will call on you in turn and enable your microphone. You will have to unmute yourself and I will let you know when it's time to do that. While that's happening, we did receive 3 comments from the online forum before the meeting began. 2 of them really have nothing to do with the finance committee, but I will read them in anyway. So I'm just going to read these 3, and then I'll start taking members from the who are in the room right now. So first comment was from Jennifer Aravallo from Ambler. She asks, how can one obtain savings figures resulting from virtual learning in the district for the past 5 months? Please include savings in transportation, staffing cuts, and utilities costs. Sean Murphy in Drescher. Are there defined times when a student can switch from virtual to in-person or vice versa? Can changes only be made if they align with the marking periods? Is there a process for officially requesting such changes? And Ann Oliveros from Fort Washington. Given the district's plan to dedicate district's plan to dedicate elementary school teachers to Cardinal Academy or in-person instruction, what is the expectation for children opted for in-person instruction who are required to quarantine for any reason? Will they be moved to the CA teacher who may be ahead or behind of their current in-person class instruction? And now, so we will address those comments at the end. Let me move on to those who have raised their hands. First up, Ginny, go ahead.
Hi, Ginny Vitale, Ambler. Wow, that was a loaded meeting, lots to cover. First of all, Arif, our deal with him was signed, what, 3 years ago for $76 million, which was already the increase on top of the increase on top of the increase. I'm not sure why he's getting more money at this point or why that's even appropriate. It makes no sense to me. And how does that affect the overall budget, what we had budgeted, which was like $3 to $4 million for him? Also, the architect, obviously we knew we would need furniture in this new building. So I'm wondering why we didn't have in our original budget an additional $18,000 to $28,000 to pay for someone to help us find furniture. Again, how would that affect our budget? It's interesting, the first part of the meeting was all about how we are going to borrow more money and more expenditures. And the reality is the second half of the meeting was all about how we don't have any money, which is how I see it. We don't have any money. We're $3 million in structural deficit, rising to $6 million. We have $255 million of debt. We didn't stay on budget for the high school, which I've said over and over many, many years ago when we were talking about Sandy Run, because the reality is it has cost us $450,000 a year for approximately 12 years, which is approximately $5 million, because we didn't get the bus depot when we built the high school. And here we are looking at another $5 million, and borrowing that money a year ahead of time is going to cost us, you know, the interest still costs money and we still have to pay back the $5 million. And that's going to bring our debt even higher. I know it's lower than the recommended amount, but Moody's has said that is one of our bad things, is that we have high debt, which we all know because we all pay for it in our taxes. And it's less money for the children in the long term. There are fields that are horrible. That bus depot location is still problematic in terms of the safety of the children that go to Fort Washington Elementary School and use those fields. They use those fields because they don't have any. The one closest to the building is like a runoff stream. It's horrible. We don't have money to buy scoreboards for our baseball team or our softball teams. We buy furniture in our elementaries and bits and pieces. We can't even furnish our buildings. There's desks in there that are probably 20 years old that have, you know, anyway, the fields, I'm glad Upper Dublin Junior Athletic Association at least cares enough to fix some of the fields that we have. The JV field at the high school for baseball is horrible. The 9th grade field at Lock Ash, near where they're going to fix it, the field they're going to fix is horrible. That is what's embarrassing. $255 million in debt is embarrassing. Not a bus depot. Yeah, is it pretty? Absolutely not. But it is buses and it's a parking garage. And I'm sorry to the transportation department, this is not personal. I wonder in our conversation before we build and spend money we don't have, if we've considered, again, I know it's not popular, if we've considered again, outsourcing transportation. And again, it's not popular, but it's true. I'm running out of time. I had the same questions about COVID. Do we have a chart versus what our budget money is so far and what we spent? I can't imagine our expenditures haven't gone down because the buildings have been shut for so long. And the cyber charter school, that is an unintended consequence of shutting down our buildings 100% back on July 27th. People left in droves, 142 people the last time I checked. And that is a huge cost to our district. And I don't blame them for leaving. They wanted something consistent, they wanted something good, and they wanted something that was set up for 20 plus years. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Francis Graham. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. It's Francis Graham from Fort Washington. The way I heard the conversation this evening around the transportation facility framed was the intent of the conversation was, should we start or should we not? And I would argue that now is not the time to start, regardless of the low interest rates. I say this given all of the unknowns that we already know about COVID today, regarding the current climate, that we don't know the funds that the school will need. It was already mentioned in this meeting tonight that there are many unknowns regarding subs and staffing, the loss of funding due to the cyber charter schools. We are still in this environment of a lot of unknowns. I don't think now is the time to start a new project. As Jenny has just mentioned, the enormous debt that the district already has, which was also on tonight's conversation, and the extent of this debt going up with the new extending of the contract and the additional furniture needs. Additionally, I would also say, what other options could be looked at besides saying, let's go with what we thought about 12 years ago? Yes, I know a few years ago there were other options that were looked at. Why wouldn't that be on the table as well? And finally, where would this money be coming from? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Joanna Waldron. Oh, hang on a second. Okay, Joanna, go ahead.
Hi there, this is Joanna Waldron from Fort Washington. And I just wanted to speak on the proposal about the transportation facility. It's a little disappointing that, I don't think there was any effort made to, inform the members of the community who have made it clear that they feel this is an inappropriate location. We received assurances that the district was looking for alternative locations, and sort of the communication stopped, and now all of a sudden we're talking about an $8 million project, and it's going to be put out, solicited for RFPs for this location only, and that's going to be happening without any input from the community. It's going to be the financial officer and the solicitor coming up with, basically designing the parameters of what's happening, and the location is a done deal. So I'm very disappointed with that. Again, this is zoned A residential, and the reason for that, it's inappropriate to have a fueling station, all the bus traffic, and all of that in this residential area. I think it's very vulnerable kids population there, very close to where we're talking about increasing this bus traffic. I think I want to know what the air quality monitoring is going to be and what the noise monitoring is going to be. I'm concerned, there's wetlands identified right on the plan. So what's going to be happening to the groundwater and potentially, affecting the groundwater quality and, any drinking water in the area. I think we need to know what's happening with buffering and with the lights. I mean, is this going to be 24-hour lighted facility with a 6-foot chain link fence? No one wants to look at that from the school. So we really need to focus on what's going to happen with, additional trees. How is this going to not look like a hideous place where buses are being stored and fueled, right in the middle of the neighborhood? And just curious whether we have confirmation from the township that, zoning relief isn't required. It sounds like the school district is doing its own plan. I understand the township was at, planning to expand their maintenance and fueling in the same area. It sounds like there's two different plans now. You made it seem that it's not joint. So do we have the blessing of the township, or is there going to be, serious land development expenditures involved with this? I think that's everything on my list. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to Caitlin Johnson. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Johnson. I live in Ambler. I have a first grader at Fort Washington and 3 more kids that will eventually go to Fort Washington. I'm an alum of Fort Washington and elementary school, and I just can't believe we're still having the same conversation about the location of the bus depot where the kids play. And so I'm just really curious if there is any information that the community could have about another location. Like, I understand why this seems like a good time. I understand why you'd want to, get the $5 million now or possibly 8. Like, I get what makes sense, but I also feel like we're the ones living here and we're going to have to deal with this for the next, 20 plus years. And so I really would wish that the community's voice would be heard, because they're continuing to say the same thing. And I also kind of got that same impression that the beginning of the meeting was all about how much we would like to spend, and the second half was how much money we don't have. So I am new to this game since I'm just, a parent and who just started listening to board meetings this year, and I'm just slightly confused about where the money comes from. Is it that you just increase our taxes every year? Like, are those assumptions based on a tax increase already, and how big is that? But overall, I am very happy. I love living here. I think you guys do an amazing job, and you really do think through so much of your actions. So I really do appreciate that. I don't want to seem like I'm only complaining. And I look forward to listening to more meetings and learning more about how everything works. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Okay, let's, next up, Lisa Burns.
Hi, this is Lisa Burns from Fort Washington. I just wanted to know when and how the community will be notified about the budget numbers that were discussed on tonight's call. I know there were a lot of numbers, but I just wanted to understand how others that are on this call see those numbers and understand those numbers, but most specifically about the proposed guessed $5 million needed for this bus depot. If somebody could please explain the process, will there be any input from the community on this? How does that work? Or does the school board just get to move forward, vote, and move forward on their own? And the next thing you know, we see an increase in taxes. So for some of us that don't have a lot of experience with these finance calls, if you could just explain what happens after tonight with seeing those numbers, and then the time frame as to the next step as to what happens. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see just one last chance. Anyone else want to speak? Please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, I will close community input and we will deal with the comments. First, I will address some of the governance-oriented comments, and then I'll pass it to the administration to deal with those. A couple things I want to say about the transportation center. A couple of people mentioned it seems like the first part of the meeting was about how much we want to spend, but the transportation center is actually about savings, not spending. The reason why it is interesting to do right now is as an opportunity to save money. So we could spend less and have a new transportation center is the belief. We have to validate that belief, but that's the idea. So this is not about, that one is not so much about spending, it's about savings. Let's see. There was a question about, in general, where the money comes from and that kind of thing, and expected tax increases. And That's a really big topic, but the short version is taxes generally do increase every year. I always say every Pennsylvanian, and I mean every Pennsylvanian, should expect school property taxes to rise every year by a long-term average of above 2%, because that's the rate, that's the targeted rate of inflation from the Fed. And there will obviously be ups and downs within that, but over the long term, the way Pennsylvania school district funding is set up, school tax increases will generally happen every year. And in terms of the process going forward, this committee has agreed to move these things forward to legislative meeting, which happens once a month. It's next Monday. That's where the board actually takes action on the specifics of the transportation center. When we get information back from the administration after an RFP happens, then we'll decide what next steps might happen. But in the meantime, on the hopes that we can save money this way, we have authorized or recommended that the whole board authorize borrowing additional money in order to save money. Let me pass it along to the administration for other questions. So Steve or Andy?
So the questions about virtual instruction, about students having to quarantine at the elementary level, they will be placed in a Cardinal Academy class. We'll work through those instances to make sure that kids are placed in a class that that is reasonably where they are. We're providing some time for teachers to collaborate together to make sure that classes stay relatively in the same place in the curriculum. Obviously accounting for individual needs, but we will work through those on an individual basis.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, Mark, about the furniture and equipment contract for Breslin, I mean, the Sandy Run middle school budget does have a line item of $1.8 million in it for furniture and equipment needs. So, I believe that's covered as part of that contract. And the Moody's, and Jamie did touch on this, but I do think it's important to go back. In the money we're looking at borrowing, and again, Mr. Sirota, you identified that that's about savings, not spending, but the borrowing of additional dollars. When we meet with Moody's, we prepare all the financials, and we prepare to answer questions. That's part of our story when we talk to them about this is $5 million of borrowing will result in savings. So, while yes, it's extra borrowing, it's part of a solid narrative that we're talking to them about. So that answers some of those questions. And the Dewey contract, it is the Dewey contract. There were terms of the contract. It's on a public document. So it did need to be addressed. So I understand the concern, but we needed to address that. So if there's anything else you think I missed, I'm happy to answer.
I think we can address some of the questions or comments about the location of the transportation facility. I want to stress that we're not committing to anything at this point, but we are exploring a possibility that could result in net savings to the district. And there is no chance that any other location could compete on cost with this location. And the reason for that is because we own it already. And so nothing else can possibly compete on cost. There are certainly, if we wanted to spend a lot more money, we could potentially do something elsewhere, although we have explored that possibility in the past and come up empty-handed with good locations in Upper Dublin. We could explore that again, but again, there is literally zero chance that any other location can compete on cost with this location. And I don't mean like, it wouldn't even be close, because we would have to buy something, it would come off the tax rolls, so we'd have an ongoing loss there as well. And this is an asset we already own that is not utilized, and to make maximum use of our assets for the good of the taxpayers, this is an idea worth pursuing. I'm certainly not committing to anything just yet. The questions about the specifics about wetlands and all that kind of stuff. Would it be lit and would it be fenced and how would it look and all that? That would come much later. We're very, very early in the process. So I don't think we're in a position to discuss those kinds of specifics yet. We just don't know. I think that covers it. Did I miss anything? Anyone see anything I missed? Oh, there was a question from one of the earlier submitted. How can one obtain savings figures resulting from virtual learning? You can see some of that in the monthly financial reports, which shows our year-to-date costs in every budget category. Andy, do you want to be more specific about where to find that stuff?
I mean, you can certainly see some of that, Mr. Sirota, but I mean, short of getting into utility bills and looking at the details of every utility bill that we get, I mean, we're just not going to know the answer to that number, short of doing a multi-week analysis of all those different areas. There's certainly some savings. I don't want to disagree with that, but there's also $640,000 of additional cyber charter school costs that go right alongside of that. And on top of, staffing, certainly there was a question about staff savings. There's certainly staff savings, but with furloughs, there's unemployment costs that come with that as well. So it's not a dollar for dollar. Until we start seeing unemployment costs come in, we really can't get to the heart of that. So there's not much more detail I can provide on that.
Right, and we don't have the detail because not all the numbers are in yet.
That's correct.
All right, Dr. Yanni, anything else to add?
I don't have anything else, Mr. Sirota. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so I'll just announce. I'm sorry, was there somebody else?
I'm sorry, I had my hand up. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Go ahead.
Just for the couple members of the community that mentioned that they're new to board meetings and a little bit confused about how our processes work, just a quick clarification, and I do appreciate them asking that question because this was a lot of information to take in. And so I just wanted to just circle back with how things are going to go, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. We'll use the bus garage as an example of a construction project, but once we get to our monthly legislative meeting next week, we'll have another discussion about the same topic, and we will take community input because it will be on the agenda, and then we'll make a decision about whether or not to issue this RFP to a number of companies who may be good construction managers and have an interest in creating a proposal for us. After that, once those proposals come back in, we will provide, not we the board, but the administration will provide a summary of what has come back because we can't decide on a vendor until that information is presented. Is that correct? That's part of Sunshine. That's part of public school budgeting in Pennsylvania, is that it has to be transparent because the money is from the community as in the form of tax money.
That's not actually entirely correct because this is not a formal bid project. This is an RFP. So we don't actually have to take board action, or it doesn't actually have to be presented to the board. However, I think it's been our past practice that it would certainly be presented to the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, I think you're sort of saying two separate things. I just want to make sure. So the actual approval of requesting proposals, I don't think that wouldn't require board approval, but when the proposals come back, we would certainly review those proposals with the finance committee and board if necessary to review the proposals and make a decision on if we move forward.
Right.
Correct. And that is the opportunity at that point when the community will hear, when we will hear, and when we can dive more deeply into the details. So right now, it's really just getting this request for proposal decided on whether we're going to move forward with just getting more information. So
And Mrs. Franczyk, you're right. The administration will provide information about any proposals that come in to the board.
Great. Much appreciated. And I do appreciate that we have some new folks getting involved in our meetings because that's how we do our best work. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from the board before I close? All right. So our next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, November 18th at 6 p.m. I think there's a chance that one could be in person since schools will hopefully be open at that point. So watch closely and see whether that one is online or in person. And we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a pleasant
Good night.
evening.
Thank you.